Okay, g'day mate. Luke Ford here with Halsey English. Halsey, what do you make of the 2020 elections?
Honestly, that's funny. That's why I wrote to you, because I thought, I've heard so many different opinions on this thing, but I haven't talked to you about it. And I haven't had a chance to watch much content lately. So I was curious as you too. I think I don't want to be a black pill, but I think we're nearing the end at this point. Like I think that Trump still's got a shot at the Supreme Court, but is it going to turn into anything? I don't know. Maybe I'm losing the faith.
How big of a role do you believe that voter fraud played in the presidential outcome?
You see, the thing is I don't think it matters, because I think they were cheating before this happened. Like before Election Day, they were actively censoring like anything negative about Joe Biden. They were, they were censoring his Twitter account. They were making shit up on the news constantly. So it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to cheat. I think they cheated like crazy on Election Day, but I think the same people that allowed the media to get away with what they get away with and allowed the big tech to get away with what they got away with, I think that it was a foregone conclusion they were going to cheat as well, and that no one would really care.
Now, on a 1 to 10, with 10 being expert in voter fraud, a 0 meaning knowing nothing, how would you rate your own expertise in the issue of voter fraud?
I would probably say I'm like a 7 or 8 in terms of like analyzing past elections and things like. I mean, here's the thing: there's always voter fraud, even without mail-in ballots. Even without all the shit that happened this time, there's always voter fraud. It's a question of, was the voter fraud significant enough to have changed the outcome? And I mean, I'm a mathematician myself, and I've seen quite a bit of statistical analysis that says for the amount of votes to change at 4 a.m. in 4 states at the same time, where they called the end to counting at the same time, you'd be more likely to win the lottery 3 times and then walk outside your house and get struck by lightning.
Okay, so on what basis would you give yourself, say, a 6 or a 7 on a 1 to 10?
I mean, I've worked as a poll watcher before. I've worked supervising counts. I mean, I know the computer algorithms and mathematics pretty well. So, and I've analyzed quite a few other elections, not only here but overseas as well. And we're seeing the trademarks of fraud so often. And I mean, I don't give a lot of weight to all the YouTube videos that you see and all the, like Twitter videos where it's like, oh, look, this person, threw out a ballot and we caught him. Like, okay, like how many ballots could that person really have changed sitting there? 5, 10, and as I said, voter fraud happens all the time. And what I'm really bothered with is that we're approaching Q levels of like stupidity in terms of what people are talking. They're like, well, the reason Giuliani gave that press conference at that beat up old garage is because across the street is a crematorium, and that's where they burned all the votes. And there's a camera outside the garage across the street that probably caught it, and that's what he was signaling to the vote fraudsters, that he's got them and he's gonna raise hell. I don't need stuff like that. And then Sidney Powell was going to release the Kraken, and she had so much information it was coming in by fire hoses. But now Trump says that she's not even his lawyer, and she's been promising that the lawsuit would be filed any day now for 2 weeks, and still we've got nothing except for a bunch of things that anyone could readily find on the internet.
Okay, so when you say we've always had voter fraud, that's a completely unimpeachable comment. It would be impossible to have elections with hundreds of millions of votes over many elections. We would have over 1 billion votes cast if, say, you combine the last 8 presidential elections. So obviously there is no doubt that we have always had voter fraud, because anything that human beings do is susceptible to fraud. There's
that, and add into the fact We have 50 different voting systems. Each state has their own system. Sometimes it varies by county, and very few states have voter ID laws. So there's no way of actually verifying votes in a lot of states other than someone walks in and signs a signature book. So there would be fraud under the best of circumstances. And in America, we are far from the best of circumstances.
Okay, so we agree that there's always voter fraud, and I think we agree that the most important question with regard to voter fraud in the American elections is how extensive it is.
Right.
And where we disagree is that I don't see any evidence that it is substantial, at least prior to the 2020 election. So when I become interested in a topic and want to know something about it, here's my process. I look for who are the academic experts in the topic, and then I go read two of the most highly regarded books by academic experts in the topic, which is what I did. I read Election Meltdown by Rick Hasen, who's a professor of law at University of California, Irvine, I believe. And then I read a 2010 book. His book came out in 2020. And I read a 2010 book called The Myth of Voter Fraud by Lorraine Minity, another academic. And so they both, to my mind, extensively debunked Republican claims of widespread voter fraud. They debunked the claims, meaning that the people making these claims simply have not provided substantial evidence. Now, there is one self-proclaimed expert on voter fraud named Hans von Popovsky, who works at the Heritage Foundation. So he has been banging on about this topic for about 25 years. He is a full-time employee of Heritage Foundation, and he runs an operation that details examples of voter fraud going back to 1948. And so all their concrete examples of voter fraud that they've been able to document going back to 1948 amount to fewer than 1,100 cases. In other words, what they've been able to document is infinitesimal. It's like so tiny that it doesn't move the needle in any way. So that's why I'm so distinctly unimpressed by these widespread claims of voter fraud, because they've never been able to substantiate them. So that's where I'm coming from.
There's three issues. One, the issue of voter fraud, in order to be truly studied, right, it can't take place in an academic setting if it doesn't have access to government records. And a lot of the records dealing with voter ID, voter, trends, all of that, a lot of that is not available to the general public. Number two, Congress has attempted to investigate voter fraud a few times, and every time it's been stopped by partisan actors. Like right after the 2016 election, Trump convened this huge voter fraud panel in Congress. He had Paul Ryan do it, basically. And they asked California, Arizona, and Nevada for their voter records, and those three states basically just told them to go fuck themselves. And over 2 years, they threatened them, we'll subpoena you, we'll do this, we'll do that. And then Nancy Pelosi took over and just ended the commission. So it wasn't really studied. Secondly, a rule of thumb that I've been going by for a while is, if you want to know what the Democrats are up to, just look at what they accuse the Republicans of, because that's most likely what they're trying to cover up for themselves. And it's been pretty rock solid. And if you look at the months leading up to this election, there were dozens of articles in the Huffington Post, on the Atlantic, in MSNBC, talking about how the voter systems are not secure, how they're liable for fraud, how they've been used to cheat before, how they haven't been certified, all these problems. And now they're claiming that all of that stuff isn't true. So there was all this concern when they thought their guy would lose and they could raise voter fraud allegations. And now all of a sudden we've had the cleanest elections ever. But again, I don't necessarily think it's about the voter fraud in terms of, do I think like fake ballots were tabulated? Of course. I have a real problem that the 4 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, were trending identical to Iowa, Florida, and Texas until they announced they were stopping the vote stopping the count at 3 a.m. All the observers were sent home, and then at 4 a.m. they found these massive dumps for Biden, like hundreds of thousands of votes. There was one dump that was 183,000 votes, not a single one for Trump.
Okay, that's bogus. I mean, it's that particular citation. It's widely cast around. You won't find any documentation for it. All these citations of 50,000 votes for Biden, 0 for Trump, 183,000 for Biden, 0 for Trump. They always turn out to be bogus upon examination. That's why I'm so skeptical of what you're saying.
I haven't seen anybody debunk them. If you're saying there have, I'll take your word for it. You're credible enough with me. And as I said, for me, the specific allegations of voter fraud are irrelevant to me in what they did leading up to the election. The censorship and the coordinated collusion that it took to suppress Biden basically stopped campaigning. Like he didn't even bother to campaign. Kamala Harris never gave a press conference after her first day being announced as vice president because they didn't have to. There was collusion among social media and the mainstream media to suppress any negative information about their candidates. That's when I think the allegation should have been raised. That's when I think court cases should have been filed saying there's actual tampering in our elections right now. We have to hear about Russia and their $12,000 Facebook campaign, for 4 years, but they could have raised these allegations beforehand. I think the fact that we lost on election day shows how unserious they took it. And now, like, to come back and say, oh, we had no idea they were going to cheat, and now they cheated. I think it's kind of, it's very self-serving, and I don't think it's impressing anyone.
So I agree with a lot of that analysis, and there's just so much to unpack here. So let's just take one element of what you said. Media and big tech tilting the playing field towards the Democrats. I think that is undisputably true, and I also think that shifts votes an infinitesimal amount. I think nobody who wants to vote for Trump is being shifted to Biden or to even not show up at the polls because of the media and big tech tilting the playing field. How significant do you think big tech and media bias is for the 2020 election results?
I mean, look at the Hunter Biden laptop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not only is there allegations, and there was a documented, like the CEO of that company came out and gave interviews saying Biden took money from China, and it was completely suppressed. I saw a statistic. Where is it? It's right here. This was from Jack Posobiec at OANN. Survey from the MRC shows 45.1% of Biden voters in battleground states were not aware of the Hunter Biden scandal. 9.4% said it would have changed their vote. Now, again, this is a post-election poll, but and it can only be given so much weight. But nobody I know of heard any of They knew there was a problem with him with the crack and the hookers and stuff like that. But no one really, other than people who watched Tucker Carlson, got to understand what was really going on. The media completely blacked it out, and so did big tech, and they did it coordinated. That's racketeering. That's collusion. You're not allowed to do that, And they did it anyway. And this is a part of the systemic problem that we have, is that Republicans tend not to do anything about it when they catch people, being bad actors. Like everyone goes, oh, boom, look, Ted Cruz, he put, Jack Dorsey in front of Congress and made him look silly. Like, do you think Jack Dorsey cared at all that Ted Cruz made him look silly? Like there was no charges going to be filed. All he did was just make him look stupid in front of Congress, which nobody watches, except for, like, as I said, people who already would watch in the first place. So this massive involvement of the media and big tech in censoring conservatives, I think is the real story of the voter fraud, of what happened. And not many people are talking about it. Like we're talking about it as, oh yeah, they suck. But I mean, there should be criminal, like, where is the attorney general? Where is Congress? Why are there not more hearings where they're actually issuing subpoenas and threatening to throw people in jail? Like, where are these people that are supposed to be helping us? And they're not. They're just silent. So when they say, well, we just have to have a peaceful transition of power, well, this isn't peaceful. They burned down how many cities? There was all kinds of violence leading up to the election that was covered up as peaceful protests and, a reaction to this or a reaction to that. Like, where are our politicians that are supposed to be pointing these things out? They're completely absent.
So my question was, and I don't think you answered it, how many votes do you think this affected? I agree with you that big tech and the news media are biased against Republicans. My contention to you would be that this shifted a minimal amount of votes, say fewer than 10,000 in the nation, in my opinion. How many votes approximately? Just give me a guess. Like, give me some sense of how big of a difference do you think big tech media bias had on this election?
How to quantify what I'm going to say? I don't think I can. Like, I can't say 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, but I would think that it would have been a much different election if Biden was actually asked questions that he had to answer that weren't softballs. I think if the media actually, allowed things to come out about Biden and reported honestly about what was going on with Biden, I think there probably would have been a lot of changes in votes. Listen, Trump is a flawed candidate. There's no doubt about it. Anyone else with his track record coming into 2016, it would have been a blowout, like 50 states almost. And he stayed non-competitive regardless throughout the whole thing. Like, Biden constantly said, "Oh, look, Trump botched the coronavirus response, and now 250,000 people are dead." But he never once said how. He never once said what he would have done differently. At one point he said he would have tested more, but we tested to the max capacity at every point of the game. We didn't have that many tests in the beginning. And also, just people knowing they had it wouldn't have changed that much. Like, whether you're into this pandemic or not, whether you think it's really is what they're the doomsday they're saying, or you think it's nothing, like, Biden kept making allegations that were patently false, and no one ever called him on. No one ever asked him to explain anything. When was the last time a politician was able to say, "I'm not going to answer that question because you guys will use it against me," and nobody gave him any pushback when he said he wasn't going to answer whether he'll stack the Supreme Court? He just said, "I'm not going to answer it because you'll use it against me." And they were like, "Well, that works for me." So would it have been a different race? Yes. But could I put a number on it? Like, how many would have shifted? I don't think anyone could.
Yeah, but I just want to understand how, to you, big tech media bias is the problem issue with regard to the 2020 election. So therefore, you've got to say that it's significant that it shifted the results of the election. From your perspective, this is more important than concrete examples of voter fraud. So you've got to be contending essentially that millions of votes were shifted because of this bias.
I easily think that. Easily. Yeah.
So
and listen, I'm not saying there wasn't widespread voter fraud that could have led to millions of votes going. I'm saying I haven't seen any proof of it.
Yeah.
Like, I everyone keeps saying Dominion this, Dominion that. We know they've cheated in foreign elections. I find it incredibly bothersome that the guy who wrote the software for smart tech that was used on all these machines is now one of the big heads of Biden's transition team. I have a big problem with their head of software development openly saying on Twitter and his Facebook page that he was going to make sure that Joe Biden won. I have a problem with their head of customer relations being the mayor of a town in Michigan, which overwhelmingly went for Biden, but had split 50-50 in 2016. These are all the things I have an issue with. Do I have any proof that they mattered? No. But I would like to see proofs from somebody. Rudy Giuliani is one of the world's biggest clowns. And the fact that he's leading the charge on this, I find incredibly bothersome, because I think I would probably much rather have QAnon fucking lead the charge than Rudy Giuliani, because he's such a clown. And it turns out Sidney Powell, like, she keeps making these really big statements that she's going to release the Kraken and it's going to be biblical and all that. But what has she shown us? Nothing. Affidavits are nice. People have testified under oath they saw fraud. That it doesn't matter. Was that enough to overcome 100,000 vote deficit in some states? No. And the courts will rule as such. I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, or how much they hate Biden. They will say, if this is not significant, they're not going to take away an election. They're not going to kick it to Congress, even though they should.
So I have so many So many fascinating topics to discuss with you related to everything that we're talking about. Let's just take one. Let's just take the question of expertise with regard to voter fraud. So I presume that you developed a much greater interest in voter fraud election night or the next day and the days following the 2020 election than you had prior. Is that accurate?
No, I actually have less interested in it after the 2020 election.
You have less interest. Okay, so how much interest did you have in it prior to the 2020 election?
A lot, because I mean, it was pretty obvious that Obama was using the levers of government in order to go after his political opponents. This goes all the way back to the 2010 midterms, his 2012 reelection. In 2016, he actively spied on a rival political campaign. Like the things that Obama was willing to do, I think were probably the times I was the most interested. But I knew they would avoid looking into Obama more than they would avoid looking into Biden. You know, if you looked into anything that Obama did, it was just considered you were a racist. So, but as I said, for me, this was a foregone conclusion that they were cheating this time, that there was going to be all kinds of weirdness and whatever. And it doesn't matter because all of the accusations can't be, if they can't be proven, they don't exist. You can say that the statistics show this couldn't have happened. It did. So even if it is, let's say it's debunked, like you said, doesn't matter. Let's say it isn't debunked, doesn't matter. If it doesn't change anything, then looking into it is pointless because you're going to have half the country say it was fraud, half the country say it wasn't. You know, and their reality will be the 50% will say it happened, 50% will say it did. So I want evidence. And right now, no one is showing me evidence. No one is showing me anything except for affidavits, which, as I said, they carry more weight than me saying something on the news. But they don't carry that much weight because they can't prove that anything big happened.
Okay, I don't get how you can believe that there's been extensive, significant voter fraud prior to this election when the Heritage Foundation, the most organized, staffed up conservative foundation to investigate this issue, can come up with fewer than 1,100 specific examples of concrete voter fraud since 1948. So if you've got people working full-time on this for decades and all they can come up with is fewer than 1,100 concrete examples, I don't understand how you could believe that there's been widespread voter fraud prior to the 2020 election.
Because I know of the work of the guy at the Heritage Foundation, and I've seen a lot of other academic studies and all of that. They're analyzing cases where people basically got caught. So we know how many people got caught over that amount of time. There's never been an in-depth analysis as to the people who didn't get caught. And it's impossible to find out because these things aren't audited. After they're over, in America, 99% of the time, the loser concedes. So there's no need to go any further. They don't even have to count another vote at that point. Once the person concedes, it's basically over. They'll keep counting just to have some kind of count. But the analysis of voter fraud, where you'd say concrete examples, these are people that have been caught and prosecuted. So yes, of course, it's a concrete example, but you can't prove it otherwise. Like, I mean,
why could you not prove it?
How could you?
I'm not an expert on voter fraud, but I know that the people who have devoted their adult lives to the topic of voter fraud, whose work is peer reviewed, who are up to date with the latest social science methods for analyzing these questions, they universally have stated that there's been minimal voter fraud, and that there's been, while Republicans have made it a big issue, voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, for more than 25 years, they've never documented it. So I'm just so disappointed that Republicans were crying that this is a rigged election. There's going to be massive voter fraud. They've been crying about voter fraud for decades. They never bothered to document it. Why can't they come up with one credible expert who can testify in court and not look like a complete fool, which is what happens when Chris Kobach, who I like everything he says, but when he testifies in court, he looks like a complete doofus, and Hans von Popovsky, these two purported conservative Republican voter fraud experts, you get them in a courtroom, you get them testifying, and they just get shredded because they're so ignorant. And these are the point guys for the Republican Party and the conservative cause on the issue of voter fraud. I just find it discouraging that this is the right wing team for voter fraud, and they're ignorant.
Well, I told you my issue with voter fraud isn't the specific cases; it's the collusion of our information centers. That to me is the main story. But again, these I haven't checked all their work, so I can't like tell you for sure. But I would say that it's probably very difficult to prove voter fraud without subpoena power and without the power of law enforcement, just by analyzing voter patterns over the many decades. Most people that commit crimes, I mean, they don't just tell you like, oh, this is how I did it. You know, in order to uncover voter fraud, you have to have an investigative body that's actually investigating it. And we've had very, very few. Congress has had two investigations into voter fraud, and basically they were very specific instances that they were looking for like a dozen cases because it was alleged. Like up until the 2020 election with all the mail-in voting, we haven't had much of a voter fraud problem because everybody voted in person. It was very difficult to get someone willing to go out and cheat like that, because if they got caught, they'd do years in prison for an amount of votes that probably wouldn't make much of a difference. Like even if you went and you took a briefcase full of cash and went through California and paid every homeless person to go vote your way, how many votes is that? 10,000? Like you're risking 20 years in prison for something that isn't going to change anything. So there's no reason to assume that people would want to cheat that much. But when you have massive amounts of mail-in balloting, a pandemic, a completely compliant media who we know will lie about everything, 4 years of Russia collusion, which turned out to be complete and utter bullshit. You know, like all of the signs are there that a fraud may have taken place. But again, I think we were done before the votes started being cast. So for me, it doesn't matter whether we can prove that 100,000 votes were changed in Pennsylvania in the middle of the night. Like, would I like it if they could prove it? Sure. Because I want Trump to win. But do I think they're going to? No, I don't. I think if they were going to, they would have by now.
Okay, so I think on just what we know about human psychology, we can get some clarity here. So let's take an individual who wants to vote illegally because he wants to make a difference. All right, so on the upside, what he can possibly accomplish is that he can cast one illegal vote for his cause, his candidates. On the downside, felony conviction, he could be convicted. He could spend 5+ years in prison and pay a fine of $100,000. So, I mean, obviously, for an individual, choosing to knowingly cast an illegal ballot would be absolutely insane. It would be against all incentives because one vote, your one individual vote, is not going to make any difference. And there's such an enormous downside. So obviously for an individual choosing to voluntarily and knowingly commit voter fraud, it makes absolutely no sense. Does that ring true?
100%.
Right.
No,
so, go ahead.
I don't think that's the type of, I think that if there was, and this is pure speculation, so I'm telling you that from the beginning. If there was massive voter fraud, I don't think it was a case of them like trucking in ballots in the middle of the night. I have a feeling it was just people that were throwing them away. You know, like they would take or double counting or something like that. Like I would be more interested in investigating the counters than I would the individual voters. Because like you said, there's just not enough incentive to go out and cheat. Like even the people that sent in, like, you know, I got 12 ballots to my house mailed here. You know, like they mailed one to someone who's been dead for 20 years. But did I send it in? Of course not. I'm not retarded. I'm not gonna send that in and risk years in prison, risk losing my gun license, you know, over something that wouldn't have made any difference whatsoever. But even if people did do that, mostly you see they get caught. Like, I mean, it's very simple to figure out if 5 different names come from the same house, you know. But I don't think that that's really what the voter fraud was. If it was systemic. And as I said, I'd like to see evidence. I just don't think we're going to. Okay,
so we agree on that. There's all the incentives for anyone with an IQ over 85 are you don't voluntarily, knowingly commit voter fraud because there's virtually no upside. Your one vote's going to make no difference, and there's a significant downside. So we completely agree on that. I completely agree with you that if there is voter fraud, it would be with regard to ballots thrown away, something like that. It would be a systemic issue. It's not a matter of illegals going out there to knowingly vote illegally, because, again, they would face huge disincentives, felony conviction, fine, expulsion from the United States. Illegals don't want to be bothered by the American legal system. So we completely agree there. Now, here's another aspect of human psychology that bears on this. If you were a journalist, or you were a congressman, or a district attorney, or anyone with subpoena power or investigative power, you could make your career. You could break a huge story. You could become the most significant person with regard to voter fraud in the history of the United States. So that's why I'm skeptical of claims of widespread voter fraud, because there are so many incentives for a congressman, a district attorney, anyone who wants to make a name for himself to expose it. So I don't, like, congressmen have subpoena power. There are congressional committees that have subpoena power. Think about how famous they could get if they documented extensive voter fraud. There are journalists and authors who are skilled in investigating these matters, tapping sources. They would have the story of the century if they could document how voter fraud has shifted presidential elections, and that no one has been able to come forward and provide this evidence makes me skeptical that the evidence exists. Now, and also the counter argument I always get to this is, well, providing evidence of voter fraud is hard. Well, all good things are hard. Of course it's hard. But just because it's hard, so everyone who disagrees with me just accepts that because providing evidence that voter fraud is hard, that then settles the matter. It's like, oh, it's hard. And nobody just wants to do the hard work.
I wouldn't make that argument, so I'm laughing about it, but I wouldn't make that argument.
So what do you think
but I will give you a little pushback on this, okay? Mm-hmm. For a district attorney, an FBI agent, or an attorney general, and anything like that, there's a massive disincentive to not investigate it. And the reason being is only the loser wants to see it investigated. The winner doesn't. And the winner is most likely in power. So if you investigate the winner, if you don't win your case outright, if you go on a vendetta against the winner of an election, the most powerful people in the country, and you don't prove your case, or if you investigate and come out and say, like, listen, I think it's bad, but like if you come out with a Mueller answer, well, I'm not saying he didn't do it, but I have no real evidence he did either. Like you could see your entire career destroyed. The problem with Congress is this: Congress can subpoena anybody they want. We have a Fifth Amendment in this country. You don't have to testify against yourself unless you're a government employee. You can't take the Fifth if you're a government employee, because you're required to testify by Congress and by said to Congress about your job. You can if they accuse you of a crime. If they say you personally stuffed ballot boxes, you could say I'm taking the Fifth Amendment, whether you work for the government or not. So the only way you get to crack somebody if they're under subpoena to Congress is by offering them immunity. And that could be even more of a political disaster than not investigating at all. Because you bring someone in front of Congress, you say, listen, I think you stuffed 100,000 ballots in the garbage can and went and incinerated them. And the guy says, I take the Fifth Amendment. And the guy says, I'm so interested in investigating this, I'm willing to immunize you, right? You cannot be prosecuted for any of this. We will offer you full immunity, right? And then the guy goes, oh, yeah, by the way, I burned 500,000 ballots. Did anyone else help you? No. Now what have you done? You may have got the guy to admit that he did it, or he just agreed to take the fall for a whole bunch of people, but you can't do anything about it. You have to let the guy walk out. He can't be charged anything. You just immunized him, and that's the only way you can compel someone to testify against themselves. So it is a double-edged sword in that the people with subpoena power would have very difficult to use. It would be very difficult for them to use it. And in order for an attorney general who works for the president to investigate, the president they work for, it just doesn't really happen. Like individual states could do it. Like, let's say the Pennsylvania state district attorney or attorney general decided to investigate it. Fine. But the governor's he works for is a Democrat. And basically you'd be alleging that he was somewhat involved, or at the very least turned a blind eye to it. That doesn't bode well for your career, even if you prove your case. Like if you prove your case, you're a Democratic appointee, which means you're a Democrat most likely. You prove your case, and then the next thing is the guy who replaces the guy you just got arrested throws you out of your job, and you're blacklisted from ever working for your party again. There is a massive disincentive to go after these type of things. So,
okay, but to substantiate your point, you would need 100% of the people with ability to find out evidence on this to cock. You'd need 100%. If there was a mayor in a city who was concerned about election fraud in his city where he had jurisdiction, if there was a Los Angeles district, if there was a district attorney in a city, if there was an FBI agent, if there was an enterprising journalist, there are so many opportunities. If you were a politician and you got someone to come forward to use your concrete example and say, I burned 500,000 ballots, that person would become a superstar. And what men want, men who have the testosterone to run for public office or to want to be in the public eye, is they want even more attention. Think of the enormous amount of attention that they would get. They would be hailed as heroes if they could get someone to come forward and say they burned 1,000 ballots, let alone 500,000 ballots. And I think for your point to be strong, you'd have to be right 100% of the time. Because even if 1% of the people who had the ability to investigate this did it and could substantiate the claims of extensive voter fraud, then it would be exposed.
But look at what you're saying, though. There's a difference in what you're saying and what I'm saying. What you're saying is that if someone had that evidence, right? If they said, look, I know they cheated like this, I'm going after these people. That's different. The issue is opening the investigation in the first place. If someone comes to the attorney general right now and says, I want to investigate voter fraud. Okay, what do you want to investigate? I think that there was all kinds of fuckery that went on in Pennsylvania. Okay, do you have any evidence? No, but I want to start investigating. And the guy says, okay, well, you're talking about a massive, investigation that once I open it, who knows how long this is going to take. And the reason you obviously want to investigate it is because your guy lost, because you never want to investigate your own side because you'd be ending your career unless you were willing to flip sides, or you didn't have one in the first place, which is highly unlikely for government employees. It's the initiation of the investigation where it gets shut down. Because they just go, look, you don't have any evidence, and I'm not going to authorize a multi-million-dollar wild goose chase. So unless you show me some evidence, I'm not going to do it. Well, I can't get the evidence unless you let me look for it. And it becomes a round and round and round we go. And as I said, the people with subpoena power, they would have to have some kind of evidence to subpoena them in the first place. Like, you don't want to embarrass yourself and just say, well, I think there's shit going on, so I'm just going to call everybody in front of Congress and start asking questions because they'll all just lie and say no. Again, it's not. And as I said, is it systemic? We don't know because it's never really been investigated, not by anybody with investigatory powers. Yes, journalists look into it, but journalists have agendas too, and they don't have the power to do anything illegal. Like they can't go crack open a voter computer and start looking at what's inside of it. It's legal. You're not allowed to do that. It becomes very, very problematic that the people we need to investigate these things are beholden to the very people that they're looking to investigate. It's like internal affairs at a police department. Like the most hated person in any police department is internal affairs. Why? Because they police cops. It's the same thing with politicians policing politicians. And I'm not saying, are there people that have come? Of course there are. Paul Ryan, as I said, started a congressional inquiry. So did Darrell Issa. By the way, Darrell Issa lost his election after that. And, these are people that they did look into it and got shut down. They weren't able to do anything and they got embarrassed. And a lot of people said, like, oh, look, while you're running around chasing voter fraud allegations, the country's starving or there's a gun problem or there's this problem. Politicians have to be incentivized, and it's very hard to get incentivized to investigate something that's going to be very difficult to prove in the first place.
So you're telling me that 10,000 people, there are 435 members of Congress, there are 100 senators, there are 50 governors, there are 50 to 100 state representatives, state senators. there are district attorneys, there are mayors, there are FBI agents, thousands and thousands of people, and not one of them is willing to go against the incentives that you've described. Does that seem credible to you when you would become a superstar if you simply revealed that 1,000 ballots were burned?
I don't know if you'd become a superstar. I mean, depends on who you were. First of all, let's take your 435 members of Congress, right? They're basically split 50-50 Republicans and Democrats right now. So the only people with the incentive to investigate it are the other side, whoever lost to the voter fraud. Nobody wants to investigate voter fraud if it benefited their own side. You know what I'm saying? Like the ethics like that don't really exist amongst politicians. But let's just use Congress. So you have 200 people. I mean, who's your congressman?
I'm not going to go into that, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that in a doxing way. I just meant, like, do you know who your congressman is?
Yes.
Do you know what he works on?
I don't know very much.
That neither does anyone else. And you talk about politics for a living.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody knows what their congressman does because most of them don't do anything or don't do much of anything. They go to hearings and they bloviate on TV and they run for re-election. So the idea that if this congressman was looking into it, he'd have to be doing so with the support of his party, because whatever committee he was looking into it for, he would need support in order to get it out there. Otherwise, he's just going to look like a crackhead, which is exactly what happens when you have a congressman who goes off the deep end and starts railing about things like voter fraud or, you know, the deep state or the CIA. If the chairman of whatever committees they're on, or if the head of their party isn't into what they're doing, then even if they get the information out there, they just seem like lunatics. So, and yes, have mayors probably investigated? Sure. Look, in Paterson, New Jersey, they just overturned an election because of voter fraud. In New York, they had to do a revote too. You know, in Nevada, they're doing one because they found fraud that changed, like, I think 100 votes. So local elections find it all the time, but it's just not a big enough deal for anyone to care.
Right, precisely. They do find voter fraud, but it's simply not significant enough to sway a presidential election. We find, you know, we've had elections they would not declare a winner. They said we need to have a revote because we've had such extensive fraud. But we're talking like 50 votes, maybe 100 votes. We've never had evidence of thousands of fraudulent votes. It's invoked all the time in rhetoric, but to say things is effortless. I can tell you right now that the 1960 election was stolen for John F. Kennedy by illegal voter fraud in Chicago. All right, that's been in the state of Illinois. That's been a talking point for 60 years, but no one ever provides the evidence. They just say things. Like, it's effortless to say things. It takes a lot of work to substantiate things. And so what we've had for decades is a lot of, you know, empty rhetoric, given that the best that the Republican Party could do, for example, was the Heritage Foundation and their fewer than 1,100 examples of concrete voter fraud since 1948. I mean, it's so pathetic what Heritage and the Republicans have done. Now, the Trump Voter Integrity Commission, chaired by Chris Kobach, that was not shut down by Dianne Feinstein. That was shut down by Donald Trump. So Republicans took up the issue of voter fraud since, I think, about circa 1994, when Clinton got through Congress voter registration, so that when you sign up to get a driver's license or to register your vehicle, it becomes streamlined to also register to vote, because the Democrats and the Republicans, at least according to the conventional wisdom, they face two different incentives. For Republicans, according to the conventional wisdom, lower turnout benefits them. According to the conventional wisdom, higher turnout benefits Democrats. So Democrats want to do everything to make voting easier because they expect that more people voting will favor them. Republicans want to do everything they can to make voting more difficult because lower turnout benefits them. So that's why Republicans have been crying about voter fraud. It's just that they've done bupkis on providing substantial evidence of widespread voter fraud. Is there anything there that you'd like to respond to?
Well, as I just said, this year on May 12th, there was an election for the city council in Paterson, New Jersey, right? A federal judge ruled there was so much procedural violations and voter fraud that the results of the election could not be taken seriously and there must be a revote, right? And the guy who won had won by 240 votes. So he found enough evidence that more than 240 votes had a problem. They also found that more than 26% of all ballots were rejected for failing to meet the standard for mail-in ballots. So right there, that's almost the margin of what they found over the last, how many, 48 years? You said, or since 1948?
Yeah.
We don't live in a federalized system for elections, which I wish we did. This is one of those few times I think the federal government should have one standard throughout the country. And I think it should be enforced on every single election that we have, because I think this idea that we have 50 different systems, which just promotes chaos, is problematic in the first place. But at the same time, everyone always says, in order to investigate voter fraud, you got to investigate it because it has to be enough to overturn an election. Otherwise, why even investigate it? Like if you're talking about two guys who changed 10 votes, what does it matter? Right? But even if you overturn a certain county in Pennsylvania, you still have the whole rest of the state of Pennsylvania, number one. And you still have the idea that even if there was voter fraud in that one county, was it enough to change the results of the election? Most likely the answer is no. You know, so there's a massive, like you said, there's a massive disincentive on the left and right for political reasons. There's a massive disincentive because will it really change anything? And there's a massive disincentive because if you do prove it, how is that going to damage your future career? All the incentive is there to not investigate. And then to say, well, since there's a lack of investigation, it shows that there probably wasn't the underlying crime. There's so much reason to not investigate in the first place. It doesn't prove that a crime didn't happen.
Oh, I don't buy this. There's so much reason. Let's say you're a Republican let's say you're an elected Republican congressman in the state of Pennsylvania. Most congressional members, most members of the House, most members of the Senate do not face competitive fights because of gerrymandering and other characteristics. Most Senate seats, most congressional seats are safe. They're not on the knife's edge. So let's say you're a Republican congressman from the state of Pennsylvania and you want to investigate how substantial there was voter fraud in the state of Pennsylvania in the 2020 election. I don't see why you would face massive disincentives if you establish that, if you even show that 1,000 votes were essentially burned. You would be a hero. You would be acclaimed because the best, to give an example, the best that Hans von Popovsky and the Heritage Foundation have been able to show is fewer than 1,100 examples of concrete voter fraud since 1948. So that is 72 years. Now, you, Joe Blow from Pennsylvania, you have access to investigators. You provide documentation that indicates that 1,000 ballots were burned. That doubles all the work that the Heritage Foundation has done for decades. You would be hailed as a hero throughout not just Republican circles, but also many Democratic circles. They don't want voter fraud either. Some parts do. Some people will do anything to win. But the massive incentives to become a hero, I just don't understand why the thousands of people who have the opportunity to be heroes, to go down in American history, to be hailed, to have movies made about them, to be profiled on 60 Minutes. I just don't get why those massive incentives to investigate this would be so dwarfed by the disincentives. Okay, so let's see. You're still there, Halsey? Okay, we may have lost Halsey for a minute. So here is Rick Hassan. He's a professor of law at
here he was.
University of
The ones they call partisan spiral.
Let me play.
few Democrats on the commission, had just been accused of allowing voter fraud to take place by Chris Kobach.
With their legal counsel. And I just scratched my head and I thought, am I not on this commission? Why do I have to go through legal counsel to find out what our schedule is?
And then in Dunlap's words, it got kind of weird from there, as if it weren't before.
I'm sorry, it got weird.
Hey, man, sorry about that.
How did it get weirder?
No problem. Hang
So
on
the
a
commission
second.
only meets twice.
I had a glitch with my connection.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure. That happens all the time. So we're also talking about a fundamental issue of how gullible are people, to get back to the issue of big tech and the media biased against the Republicans for the Democrats. So I don't believe that human beings evolved to be gullible. So I don't believe that the media changes a substantial amount of votes. How gullible do you think people are to vote and to act in general against their own best interests?
I don't think people have any idea what's in their best interest. And I think that most people aren't invested enough in the majority of things that they hear to care one way or the other. Like, I mean, all you have to do is look at the Black community with the Democratic Party. Like the Black community has been shit on by the Democratic Party forever. And yet they still vote for them, and there's a term, I'm trying to remember what it is, about the price we pay, basically, to be involved in politics. Like, you have to be educated in some form in order to get involved in the first place. I could send you a really good video about it. There's a really good professor that talks about it. But most people don't care about most issues. And that's why you hear talking heads talk about this all the time. They'll go, 85% of America supports taking action to fight climate change, right? But you didn't ask them how much they care. Like, is that going to change their vote for anybody? Probably not. They probably don't care that much about it. But if you ask, should we fight climate change? They'll say yes. And then that gets recorded as a percentage. People's ability to care about things is much different than how much they care. Like an anti-gun politician is enough to change my vote. I will say I am 100% in support of the Second Amendment. It's one of the strongest voting issues that I hold. If you talk about someone who's anti-gun, a lot of times, more often than not, they'll say, yeah, I think all guns should be banned. Would you vote for a pro-gun politician? Sure. Like they don't care enough about the issue to actually make it change their vote. So it's not that people are gullible. It's just that people don't care about the majority of issues that people like us do care about, because we care about politics. Most people don't. Most people think of politics as kind of like a tribal thing or like a cool thing or a party thing, But look, I got to run. I got to go pick up my kids.
Okay,
so,
great to catch up with you, man.
No problem, man. I really do appreciate it. It's a great time. I'm glad I had some time to talk to you.
Yeah, it was great fun. Thank you so much. Okay, man. Take
no
care.
problem. We'll talk soon.
Bye. Yep. Bye-bye. Okay, here is law professor and election fraud expert Rick Hazen, author of the 2020 book, Election Meltdown.
It meets first in July 2017, essentially a photo op. It meets again in September 2017, which was a little awkward because the meeting's in New Hampshire. Bill Gardner, who's Secretary of State of New Hampshire, one of the other few Democrats on the commission, had just been accused of allowing voter fraud to take place by Chris Kobach in a Breitbart column that appeared just before the meeting. And not really much else is happening. And Dunlap realizes he's out of the loop. He's not getting documents. He has a sense that things are going on behind the scenes because, for example, a letter went out requesting the states provide this voter registration information. He wasn't asked for input on that letter. And so he gets this anonymous tip, hey, maybe you better get a lawyer and try and sue the commission to get access to the documents that you as a commission member should be entitled to. And he files a suit.
We filed a lawsuit. We got the preliminary injunction on December 22nd, 2017. We had a conference call with all the attorneys. And by the way, I'm not a lawyer. I was a commercial cook for 20 years. So I don't necessarily always fly in these circles. Had a big conference call, and I asked the question. I said, what do you think the odds are that the president simply dissolves the commission?
And weirdly, that's exactly what happens, right? 10 days after the phone call Matt Dunlap has just described, January 2018, President Donald Trump announces he is disbanding the commission. Unbelievable. Is this the end of the story?
So Donald Trump and Chris Kobach's Election Integrity Commission were a clown show. Absolute clown show. So if voter integrity and voter fraud are such a big issue, then why did they go forward with their commission? Why did they wind it up? Why did they conduct it in such a pathetic way? All right, Donald Trump in the 2016 election was talking about how the election was rigged. He's giving us all that malarkey. And why didn't he do something about it? Donald Trump he started a commission that was pathetic, that went about things in a completely clown world way, and came to a completely ineffective halt and provided zero evidence of their claims. Okay, here's...
Well, Ann Coulter, of course, the best-selling author. You can get all of her books. You can get her new column at, just came out this week, at AnnCoulter.com. Great stuff up on the website, AnnCoulter.com. And make sure you follow her on Twitter. It's Ann Coulter at Twitter. Ann Coulter, how you doing?
Fine, thanks. How are you, Mark Simone?
Very good. Hey, you've been speaking all over the country. You don't get nervous about all this traveling around?
There was an article in the New York Times about how safe planes are. You have to wear the mask the whole time, and as you know, I'm a long-time mask wearer on airplanes, and I'm with all young people. So they are... It seems that contrary to what they're telling you in New York, young people are not really susceptible to COVID, and they can't spread it because they're not symptomatic. And the colleges, I mean, it's a little weird. The colleges all have COVID rules, so there are limits to how many people can be in a room. We're all wearing masks, which is sort of too bad because I miss the liberal hecklers.
Well, they can still heckle you, but now you hear, woo, you don't know what they said.
Right. In theory, they could, but it's sort of groupthink sort of behavior. So that they don't seem to be coming out. They might be sitting there brooding silently to themselves, but they need to be in a group to do the heckling. Are
you using your microwave right now?
Why do you ask? Did you hear?
I got good hearing. I think I heard a little beep there, like a microwave beep, something like that. Would I be a good detective?
I might be. I'm not telling.
So now, what do you think when you watch Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, these press conferences, these affidavits? What chance do you think the president has?
Well, I assume there was cheating. The Democrats always cheat. I doubt it's going to make a difference because it's...
Okay, so Ann Coulter is an attorney. Why couldn't she be bothered to provide evidence that Democrats always cheat? She'd become a superstar. The Heritage Foundation has devoted resources and time, well over a decade, to documenting examples of voter fraud, come up with a pathetic number of fewer than 1,100 going back to 1948. So it's effortless to stand back and say Democrats always cheat. But if the Democrats always cheat, then why couldn't Ann Coulter bother to provide some evidence for it? I mean, how many people are impressed that just because someone says, a pundit says, oh, Democrats always cheat? That's effortless. You're just telling people what they want to hear. But if you had any integrity, you would provide evidence. You'd investigate the matter. You might even read some books on voter fraud.
Baked in the cake at this point. I mean, how do you, even if everything is true, even if the affidavits are true, election fraud is something you need to deal with before the election.
Yeah, that's true.
Afterwards, it's baked in the cake.
And so, yeah, people keep making the argument, oh, they're not incentivized to make the case about voter fraud if the election went their way. Of course, they face incentives to reveal voter fraud, even if the election went their way. You would become an American hero. You would be set up for the rest of your life. You would make millions of dollars. You would go on the speaking circuit. You would be acclaimed, right, if you could substantiate substantial amounts of voter fraud. So you face very strong incentives to put up the evidence if indeed you can provide it. But the people who claim massive voter fraud, they can never They can never provide the evidence. And the chat is sending me to an article in the Federalist. And a lot of people, when you talk to them about voter fraud on the right, they're always citing all these articles on the Federalist. And so who is this prestigious voter fraud expert? It's J.B. Shirk. Who is J.B. Shirk? He is a proud American from Daniel Boone country. Well, if J.B. Shirk is a proud American from Daniel Boone country, then I know that this guy is a real expert. And he also writes for Real Clear Politics and Muck Rack and American Thinker, and he is on Facebook. So you know that this guy is an expert on voter fraud. The estimable, the honorable J.B. Shirk, voter fraud expert.
So I'm glad to finally hear Republicans talking about election fraud. It's something
Republicans haven't been talking about voter fraud for the 2.5 decades since the Motor Voter Act was passed. They've been talking about it infinitely. It's very easy to talk about stuff. I do a show for 3 hours a day because it's easy to come here and talk about stuff. You know what's hard? Is providing evidence. And that looks like UCLA is that UCLA in the background? No, I'm not sure. No, it's not. It's infinitely easy to talk. And that's all Ann Coulter does. That's all Republicans do is they talk about voter fraud, but none of them can be bothered to get their hands dirty to do a little bit of work to provide evidence. And why don't they do that? I always get the same answer from Republicans for why the Republican Party, the pundits, Republican voter fraud experts, why can't they ever provide evidence of substantial voter fraud? Because it's hard. It's hard, Luke. They might face some blowback. We just can't expect anybody to do anything hard. So enormous upside, you become an American hero if you provide evidence. But the downside is it's hard, Luke. If something's hard, you can't expect anyone to do it, even though tens of thousands of Americans could become heroes and set financially and status-wise for life if they do this work. But we can't expect any one of 100,000 different Americans to do this work because it's hard, Luke. And things that are hard, you just can't expect anyone. Zero. Remember, that's the case you're making. You've got to argue that 100% of the people with the ability to investigate and reveal voter fraud, 100% of them do not do it because it's hard, right? So for your argument to be persuasive, it has to be airtight. It has to be 100% of the people with the ability to substantiate and document extensive voter fraud. 100%. Not a single one of them will step forward and do it because it's hard, Luke. It's hard. You can't expect anyone to do anything that's hard. You know what's not hard? Just saying, oh, Democrats always cheat, or writing articles for the Federalist. Do you know what substantial credibility you need to post, need to show to post articles on the Federalist? You know what a high bar that they set? Well, actually, it's not very high. You know what a high bar you need to set to go into a YouTube chat, or to go on Twitter, or to call into a talk radio station, or to host a talk show and say, there's extensive voter fraud. That requires zero effort, and it should receive zero respect from any thinking person, because it's effortless to say these things. What requires a little effort is to substantiate these wild allegations.
I've been talking about for some time. Maybe they'll take it seriously. Maybe they'll start listening.
So zero for Ann Coulter's point to be persuasive, zero Republicans over the past 2.5 decades, including Ann Coulter, have decided to take voter fraud seriously. Zero. Not one. Right? For her case to be correct, not one has decided to take voter fraud seriously. So this vital matter, which is swinging the direction of the future of the American empire, has been decided in a vital area by voter fraud, but not one Republican has been bothered, including the speaker here, Ann Coulter, over the past 2.5 decades to substantiate these wild allegations.
The most important issue right now for any of you young people who do not have to worry about COVID because you're young, or at least if you don't have any comorbidities, and you want to save the republic, you ought to be getting yourself to Georgia, because the most important issue of election fraud right now is what's going to happen in the Georgia runoff. Those are January 5th.
Yeah, but when we find out there's a Canadian company associated with Soros, Dominion, and Smartmatic that do the counting, and the counting is actually done in Germany and Spain on those servers, how the hell did anybody allow that to happen? How did the RNC allow any of that to happen?
Yeah, and is that true? Is that accurate? Or are you just like pulling stuff together?
It does sound weird, and
Okay, so in other words, neither Anne nor the host actually know what they're talking about.
I mean, my first objection to it is my same objection when we all had to start wearing masks with COVID. This isn't made in the United States. What is the matter with this country? We have a lot of really smart people and good workers, and we've always made great stuff. Is it the unions that just drove every single thing that is manufactured is not manufactured in this country now? Trump was going to bring it back.
Well, he started to. That's one reason they had to get rid of him. The swamp thing is all these businesses wanted to make it.
Okay, people didn't vote to get rid of Trump because he was bringing manufacturing back. Donald Trump is a deeply flawed human being. Right? I would have voted for him. I didn't bother to vote. It wouldn't have made any difference in California. But Donald Trump's a deeply flawed human being. He was never able to extend his popularity much beyond his rabid base. People didn't vote for Biden because they wanted to stop Trump bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. They stopped voting for Trump because they got tired of him. So those who changed their votes, say, from Trump in 2016 to the Democrats in 2020, it's because they got tired of the show. They got tired of what they may have viewed as a grift. They wanted a calmer president, someone who wasn't in their face all the time. They wanted more competent government.
Get over there because you can pay everybody a penny a year instead of $40 an hour. So.
No, that's exactly right. But I suspect that, I think you probably know a lot more people in this line of work than I do. But from what I understand, companies never really, the increase in pay per hour, they don't really care about. It's the union rules. Well, you're seeing it right now in New York with them shutting down the schools. At least from what I've heard, and I trust Mr. New York here.
So this is why I don't really care for pundits. Like, I would much rather hear from someone who's an academic expert, even if they're on the left, even if they have completely different politics than me. I want to hear from people who've devoted their lifetime to the issue. So pundits, they can blow a lot of hot air.
That the problem is that the teachers' unions bargained in protocols before they will go back to school until there is no more COVID, and it's the rules that are too expensive to comply.
And you hear this all the time from conservatives. It's the teachers' unions who are ruining our public education. Again, it's nonsense. All right. The problem is not bad schools. The problem is bad students. United States public education system produces the best results for the various ethnic groups of any system in the world. Yet it's this grift, or it's this unthinking nonsense that the right-wing pundits and Republicans run on as the fault is the teachers union. Well, show me a higher performing public school system with the same demographic groups, right? American blacks perform about the best in the world in the American public school system. American Asians perform at about the highest level in the world with the American public school system. So the different demographic groups in the United States who go to public school perform in their educational scores pretty close to the top of their group anywhere in the world.
Fly with.
Yeah, one reason all the companies bribed Republicans and Democrats for years to move everything overseas. The cost of...
And chat says, teachers' unions have screwed years of kids' lives. Where's the evidence? Okay, which public school systems do better? Where's the concrete evidence with test scores vis-a-vis demographic groups that do better than the American public school system? There simply isn't one. There isn't substantial evidence.
The workers, the rules go away, no unions, no rules. And also they'll tell you privately, insurance reasons. There's no insurance concerns ever again. If 50 workers blow up in a factory and it's in China, nothing. You don't have to worry about it. If one guy...
I mean, that's a horrible thing about China, but there are also a lot of silly rules about, I'm sure this is, I mean, for something that can't be made here. Television production. That's why no one in TV seems to care about jobs being shipped abroad. But I remember doing MSNBC or NBC, and you go into the NBC building, and there would be, rooms full of makeup people just sitting around chit-chatting. I like to get my makeup done before doing TV. I have, 10 minutes to go on air. And no one's taking me to a makeup room, and I'd stop and ask, can you give me some powder? Can you do my makeup? No, we're NBC. That's MSNBC. We're not allowed to do union rules. So that's the sort of thing that drives companies crazy. No, not my job. And I think in that book, The Future Once Happened Here, there's some hilarious rules by Fred Siegel of Manhattan Institute, hilarious rules from, like, the school janitors union. That really it has nothing to do with pay. You can make a lot of money. You can have a great life. Just you got to give up on these obnoxious unions with their stupid rules and regulations and what an employee can be asked to do. So that's what upsets me most about the election machines being made in China or whatever.
Yeah, or the counting actually being done overseas. So, but you sounds to me like you don't think there's any chance of you believe there is some fraud, but you don't think it's enough to overturn.
Democrats cheat every close election. Al Franken in 2008. Look up the gubernatorial election in Washington State of 2004. It was the exact same thing. The Republican won. Actually, it was Dino Rossi by like 5,000.
Okay, there's no evidence that the Democrats cheated in these elections. This is just something cheap that you throw out. So there are more Democratic late arriving votes for various reasons. The different political parties often vote differently. So Republicans tend to have jobs, and that affects when they show up to the polls.
1,000 votes election night. And Democrats just kept, every few days, another week, hey, guess what we just found? Another
And there's no evidence that this is fraudulent. All right, if mail-in ballots come in, and this is done according to the law, just because you're ahead on election night, it's like complaining that your team is leading at the end of the third quarter, but ends up losing the game. Or that's because the other side cheated. They just kept coming up with points in the fourth quarter. Elections aren't necessarily decided on election night. Just because you're ahead by 1,000 votes on election night, then you end up losing the election. That constitutes zero evidence and zero proof that the election was fraudulent. Come on, man. Cut out this malarkey.
Ballot of ballots? That's right. Bingo. Look, under the Xerox machine. Until finally the Democrat won. John Ashcroft, remember they kept the polls open for 45 minutes in St. Louis, but no place else? So they do it all the time. Of course they did. And I wish it, and also they slipped through mail-in voting, which is absolutely subject to fraud. But Trump, as usual...
Subject to fraud. I mean, listen to this like mealy mouth rhetoric. We have 5 states that have been exclusively mail-in voting for years, and there's no evidence that they've had any more fraud than in-person voting. Now, it makes sense that there could be problems with mail-in ballots and fraud, but we don't have any evidence of it. It's just so easy to toss off these assertions, so much more difficult to substantiate your case.
Thinks that saying something is the same as doing it. Just going around telling people there's voter fraud didn't do anything to fix it, so I don't know how you can fix it now.
Yeah, and you should point out, Republicans would be happy to cheat too, but the reason it's always Democrats, they usually control the cities, the municipalities, the lifelong career bureaucrats that control the machines, the county, generally all Democrats. And we find out now they're being run by secretaries of state put in by George Soros, far left-wing people. So
yeah, that's why there are many Democratic machines. There are no Republicans.
Yeah. Okay, so this is pundits and talk show hosts just telling people what they want to hear. And it's at such a low intellectual level. Coulter and Simone, they should be ashamed of themselves.
No, they were started by Irish criminals. So if you're watching MSNBC, stop saying this is because these are majority black cities. These were Democratic machine cities long before black people moved from the south to the north.
Yeah.
And is Luke now on the Biden train? I don't regard myself as on the Biden train. I am open to the possibility that Joe Biden will turn out to be a better president than Donald Trump. I don't believe that. I don't expect that, but I try to be open. I support Trump as better than any of the alternatives. On the other hand, I know that my understanding of life is severely limited. I only know a tiny little bit, so I'm not going to get all arrogant and proclaim, oh, the world's coming to an end because Joe Biden is going to be president. We'll see what Joe Biden does. I expect that he will be a significant downgrade from Donald Trump, but who knows?
You know, you're right. You never hear any city that's run by the Republican machine.
No, it was Irish criminals. New York, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Chicago, obviously. We're not worried about Democratic machines in, Salt Lake City, really even not even Washington, or not even Los Angeles or San Francisco, Santa Fe. No, we're talking about Democratic machine cities that have existed long before they were majority black. Knock off the racism stuff, liberals.
Yeah, all right. Well, Ann Coulter's been on a speaking tour around the country, and as you go out into the middle of America, what are people as worried as people in New York about the virus and all that?
No. Actually, I don't know if people are that worried in New York. My experience is there's real life and then there's television, MSNBC and CNN, and they really love to keep. I think part of it is because, they want to keep the ratings up now that there's no Stop Trump movement, or at least they don't think they need to. So the election's over. They need to really pump up the crisis. But the other thing is, and oh, please, God, let me be right because I can't take this anymore, that they just want everything to go into the crapper for the next, whatever it is, 65 days. Just misery, pain, plague. And then Biden and Kamala will get in, and the skies, the water will part, the sun will come out. I'm certainly hoping that's what it is because... And by the way, one great thing Trump did, deserves credit for this, Operation Warp Speed, is amazing. It's hilarious how fast this vaccine has come out and how fast it's going to be distributed.
Yes, when you want warp speed, Biden is not your guy.
Okay, so what does a real voter fraud expert sounds like? It sounds like this. This is law professor Rick Hasen, author of Election Meltdown 2020 book. Come on, man. I just clicked.
Story?
It's
playing.
the end of the story to the extent that the commission produces no findings.
Okay, this is Trump's commission. This is Chris Kobach's commission on election integrity. All right, this is the vital issue, right? We've got voter fraud, that the election is rigged. That's what Trump kept saying in 2016. So he formed a highly partisan commission to investigate it. So therefore, the commission had very little credibility, except with certain Republicans. And they release zero findings. So if the 2016 election is rigged and voter fraud is this massive problem, why don't you investigate it? Why don't you release some findings? They couldn't. It was clown world.
There's nothing comes out of the commission. But lawsuits continue, as is the American way, including Dunlap's lawsuit. And they lead to lots of documents being disclosed about what was going on. And in fact, it was true that it was von Spakovsky and Adams working with Kobach behind the scenes to craft the letter that demanded the voter registration information. I think we should pause for a second and recognize that this is a really important victory for democracy that the commission collapsed. In a recent book on how democracies move into authoritarianism, Professors Levitsky and Ziblatt make the point that a commission that is meant to change the rules for elections and go after political opponents is a kind of a hallmark of authoritarianism. So it's really important not only that this commission failed, but that it failed resoundingly and that we're finding out all of this behind in order to promote the rule of law and belief that elections need to be fair.
Okay, so there I think Rick Hasen is on shaky ground. There's just no reason to believe that Donald Trump is an authoritarian.
Then there was a question of Kobach. So Kobach goes on to the radio and he says, it's not over yet. The Democrats didn't play nice, so we're taking their toys away and making them go home. But we're going to continue this work over at the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security says, we have no idea what he's talking about. Kobach goes back to Kansas. Eventually he runs for governor, loses the race for governor, and Kansas, a solid red state, gets a Democratic governor. And now he's running for Senate and Republicans in the state are worried that he might lose that election for Republicans as well.
After the president had dissolved the commission, Secretary Kobach said publicly that, Secretary Dunlap is willfully ignoring the voter fraud happening right under his very nose. And I was asked to respond to that. And I said, if Secretary Kobach can give me one illustrated case of voter misconduct, I will retract everything I've said. I've never heard back from him.
Yeah, I mean, how reckless is this? Chris Kobach, the Republican voter fraud expert, and he publishes an op-ed in Breitbart talking about how voter fraud is rampant in the state of Maine. The state of Maine Attorney General, says, give me one example and I'll retract everything I've said. Kobach cannot come up with one example. And this is like the Republican point man on voter fraud? Come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
Even though the commission has ended, President Trump has revived his claims of voter fraud. And I expect as the 2020 election heats up, we're going to see him do the kinds of things he did in 2016, which is to try to claim that voter fraud's a major problem and to send his supporters into the major cities to look for evidence of voter fraud, efforts which could be seen as trying to suppress the vote.
Chris Kobach, in the end, not only couldn't get his governorship.
Oh, they could. That's such a weak argument. Efforts to suppress the vote by having observers. Now, here I think the law professor is on pretty weak ground. But yeah, the conventional wisdom is the Republicans win by suppressing the vote. Democrats win by making voting as easy as possible. Having observers, I don't see how. I mean, Rick Hasen's argument there, it could be seen as suppressing the vote. Well, everything could be seen as suppressing the vote. I mean, everything could be seen as screwing the pooch. There's something could be seen as suppressing the vote or screwing the pooch is not really a strong argument.
But he couldn't make stick this claim of widespread non-citizen voting. But nevertheless, he does get his day in court, and we're going to talk about that next. You're going to take us through the other side of this same coin, which is voter suppression.
In which Chris Kobach reprises his role as election fraud fever dreamer.
So I believe that there could be voter suppression. I don't think that's just empty rhetoric. Yeah, if you make voting incredibly difficult, then yeah, that could be accurately called voter suppression. And let's say making voting more and more difficult works to the advantage of the Republicans. I completely understand why Republicans would want to do
Google's free tools are designed to
tangents on
Julie Robinson's courtroom. Julie Robinson, fourth generation Kansan, first African test.
Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive here, and we're going to look at some cases in Kansas and Texas where the claims of voter fraud were really put to the test. And what we see is that they failed the test, and that really these are tactics aimed at voter suppression.
So where are we going first, Rick?
Kansas, 2018, Julie Robinson's courtroom. Julie Robinson.
And the chat sent me a link to a Washington Post article, A Trend of More Failing. Online school assent Fs spiking by 83% in Virginia's largest school system. Online learning is causing a serious drop in academic achievement in Virginia's largest school system, especially with the most vulnerable students. Those with disabilities and English learners are struggling the most. Well, yeah, what's the demographic? I am going to guess here. These aren't Japanese Americans. I'm going to guess here that these aren't Jewish Americans. These aren't Chinese Americans who are struggling. Bad students tend to get bad educational results. It's not the public school unions who are holding down all these incredible potential rocket scientists. Right? These people who are having trouble in Virginia, they were never going to be doctors. They were never going to be lawyers. They were never going to be professors. They're never going to be scientists. They're never going to be entrepreneurs. The only way you are ever going to be able to get these people through high school is by eliminating any sense of standards. So, yeah, bad students tend to perform badly, whatever the educational system.
fourth-generation Kansan, first African-American woman federal judge sitting on the bench in Kansas. This is a case brought by the ACLU called Fish versus Kobach. Fish versus Kobach is arguably the most important voting rights trial of the 21st century.
And I remember this case, but can you remind us why this case in Kansas becomes so significant?
Chris Kobach wasn't done with his efforts at voter suppression when the commission disbanded. He instead was one of the lead trial lawyers in a case that was testing a law that Kansas had passed called the Documentary Proof of Citizenship Law, or DPOC. And what this law did was it said that if you wanted to register to vote, if you aren't already a registered voter in Kansas, you had to provide either a birth certificate or a naturalization certificate, something to prove that you were an American citizen. And
okay, so I can understand how you can make an argument that that is voter fraud. I mean, is voter suppression.
Of citizenship law, or DPOC. And what this law did was it said that if you wanted to register to vote, if you aren't already a registered voter in Kansas, you had to provide either a birth certificate or a naturalization certificate, something to prove that you were an American citizen. And before...
And there's a comment in the chat, stats never lie. Stats lie all the time.
The ACLU and others came in and brought this suit. We know that 30,000 Kansans who tried to register to vote had their registrations put on hold. We hear a lot about...
Okay, so that you can legitimately call that voter suppression. As a Republican, I don't really care because I don't think they're going to vote for me anyway, right?
Voter ID laws, we don't know how much they suppress the vote, and we don't know how many people are not voting because they can't produce an ID. And I think that there's some validity.
Now, every first world country except the United States of America requires voter ID. So to require voter ID and then call that voter suppression, that seems like a stretch.
Validity to those claims, we really have a hard time knowing how many people are deterred by voter ID laws. But this is a different law. This is a law about voter registration, and we know a number. We know that 30,000 people in Kansas had not, at least to that point, been able to produce the right piece of paper. And so this law has a potentially huge suppressive effect. It could affect outcomes of elections on a massive scale. And even more importantly, it was depriving Kansas voters who would be eligible to vote otherwise of their right to vote.
Okay, so all these new citizens, they face some obstacles in voting in Kansas. So I don't lose sleep over this. On the other hand, I don't think Rick Hasen is talking about pure nonsense either.
Based mostly on the fact that they haven't produced this piece of paper that Kansas wanted. Now,
well, Republicans face incentives here. They want to discourage voting by people who are less likely to vote for them.
The ACLU and others claimed that this law violated federal law, which provides streamlined procedures for voting, and instead was really aimed at a non-problem. The case bounced back and forth between the district court and the appeals court.
Right. If you're going to put all these obstacles in the way of new citizens voting, you need to provide evidence that there's a problem with new citizens voting fraudulently. Without that evidence, then putting these obstacles in the way of new citizens voting does look to neutral observers like deliberate voter suppression.
At this point, when the case goes to trial, the main question is, how much non-citizen voter fraud is there in Kansas? Is it a big problem? Because if it's a big problem, that might justify a law that requires show me your papers. And so here was the chance to actually prove it in court. You've got Von Spakovsky as an expert witness. You've got Kobach, even though this is so unusual as a Secretary of State, he normally wouldn't be running the trial, but there he is running the trial, and they're litigating over this question of whether or not non-citizen voting is a big problem in Kansas. And the star witness is a professor named Jesse Richman, who comes in and has a bunch of different models where he's trying to show that non-citizen voting is a major problem. Now, one of his studies was based upon 4 out of 14 people in a nationwide survey responding from Kansas saying they were not citizens, but that they had cast a vote. And he
Okay, so this is Hans von Popovsky he's talking about. This is a guy who's funded by the Heritage Foundation. He goes on all these different talk shows, and on Fox News, he's proclaimed as an expert in voter fraud. You go to his first resort in Google, which is from Heritage Foundation, and this is what they say about this joker. Hans von Spakovsky is an authority on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, immigration, the rule of law, and government reform. Okay, if a guy is supposed to be an expert on all these things, my common sense suggests that he's an expert on none of these things. But if you go to his page at the heritage.org website, there is great news. You can download a headshot of Hans von Spakovsky. Like, who would not want to download a headshot of this giant legal scholar?
Extrapolated from that and said, oh, that probably means about 32,000 non-citizens vote.
Okay, do you hear how ridiculous this guy is? What a clown this guy is? And yet he's brought on nationally syndicated radio shows and on Fox News to make the case for massive amounts of voter fraud. And he's a clown.
And the star witness is a professor named Jesse Richman, who comes in and has a bunch of different models where he's trying to show that non-citizen voting is a major problem. Now, one of his studies was based upon 4 out of 14 people in a nationwide survey responding from Kansas saying they were not citizens, but that they had cast a vote. And he extrapolated from that and said, oh, that probably means about 32,000 non-citizens voting. Now, this methodology was criticized as so weak that 200 political scientists wrote a letter saying this was a bad way to try to figure out how many non-citizens were voting.
Right. Do you hear how ridiculous Hans from the Heritage Foundation is? I mean, his methods here are just pathetic. And this guy is proclaimed an expert on voter fraud by nationally syndicated talk radio hosts such as Dennis Prager. He's all over Fox News.
It's a major problem. Now, one of his studies was based upon 4 out of 14 people in a nationwide survey responding from Kansas saying they were not citizens, but that they had cast a vote. And he extrapolated from that and said, oh, that probably means about 32,000 non-citizens voting. Now, this methodology was criticized as so weak that 200 political scientists wrote a letter saying this was a bad way to try to figure out how many non-citizens were voting. So he came up with a different way. And this way is really incredible. There's this moment that really has to be heard to be believed. Unfortunately, there's no audio of the trial that's been publicly released. All we've got is the transcript. So we've asked Dale Ho, who directs the ACLU's Voting Rights Project, to read his part of this cross-examination. And I will read the part of the expert witness.
Just hypothetically, Dr. Richman, if you came across the name Carlos Murguia, would you code that as foreign or non-foreign?
I'm sorry, could you please spell the name?
Sure. Carlos, C-A-R-L-O-S, Murguia, M-U-R-G-U-I-A.
Richman says probably.
Probably what?
Richman says probably would code it as foreign.
Okay. Are you aware that Carlos Murguia is a United States District Court judge who sits in this courthouse?
Richman says, I am not. So here it was. They're in the courtroom. It's their chance to try to prove that this is a major problem in Kansas, that non-citizens are voting. They're affecting our elections. Remember, Trump has said 3 million non-citizens voting, and yet they can produce basically nothing. Both Trump and von Spakovsky kept claiming it's the tip of the iceberg, and yet Chief Judge Robinson, when she concludes her opinion in the Fish versus Kobach case, rejecting the argument that this law is needed to prevent non-citizen voting, she says, quote, there is no iceberg, only an icicle created by confusion and administrative error. We saw this from the Pence-Kobach Commission. We see it from the trial. No iceberg, not even an icicle. It's more like a evaporating melted puddle of water.
So it's good, right? It's all settled. The trial has quashed the notion of widespread voter fraud. We now know it is a myth. And ponies and unicorns and rainbows, we all can just get on to the project of ensuring the dignity of one person, one vote in America, right?
Yeah, in fact, we can cancel the rest of this podcast because
Excellent.
everything is perfect
Everything's
now.
good.
No, unfortunately not.
No.
The voter myth keeps coming back like a vote-suppressing zombie rising from the dead. Someone who knows a lot about this?
Nina Perales. I'm the Vice President of Litigation for MALDEF, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund.
She's litigated many cases of voter suppression. She's argued before the United States Supreme Court in a gerrymandering case. She's been in the trial court in the trenches. She even had a case in Kansas, an earlier part of the challenges to these documentary proof of citizenship laws.
Well, I remember being in a courtroom with Chris Kobach in federal court in Kansas, and he was unable to come up with a single documented instance of an individual who was not a U.S. citizen purposefully registering to vote, knowing that they were ineligible.
Right. So Chris Kobach says there's this massive problem in the United States with illegal aliens voting, but he can't come up with a single instance. Pathetic. This is clown world. Come on, man. Stop this malarkey.
Just couldn't come up with anything. And that's pretty consistent with our experience around the United States. That was certainly what was going on in Arizona when we litigated the Arizona case as well. On the one hand, we had tens of thousands of people who had been rejected for voter registration because they hadn't come in with the kind of burdensome paperwork that was being required of them. And on the other hand, the evidence was that there was really only a handful of individuals who had ever been registered to vote as non-citizens. And in all of those instances, it was inadvertent. So, for example, somebody with a language barrier may have gotten registered to vote by accident at the motor vehicles department while getting a driver's license that they were entitled to. Or somebody may have been inadvertently registered to vote as a non-citizen by an over-enthusiastic voter registration drive.
Well, maybe in Texas there's better evidence. But Nina Perales recalls a deposition, a case challenging that state's restrictive voter ID law.
So press 1 in the chat if you're feeling really, very disenfranchised, if you feel like the election was stolen, if you don't know who you're most angry with. Was this whole post-election Trump legal appeals, was this just a big grift? Did you buy into the Trump legal team's arguments? Is this adding to your anger? Are you having to pay off lost bets? And you remember in 2016, amidst your jubilation, did you ever have a cold moment of pausing and thinking that the tables would someday be turned on you?
The witness that was testifying was a state representative, and she was asked whether she had personally witnessed any instance of voter fraud, and particularly non-U.S. citizen voting. And the state representative very proudly told a story in which she had been in the polling place voting, and another voter who was an elderly Hispanic woman needed assistance in voting on the machine, and she needed that assistance in Spanish. And the state representative testified that this was evidence of non-U.S. citizen voting because the voter was Hispanic and needed language assistance.
So if you don't trust the system, in which ways do you not trust the system? Because the system, for all its flaws in 2020 America, still works more efficiently and effectively than pretty much any system humanity has seen in 10,000 years.
And it certainly wasn't evidence of non-U.S. citizen voting. It was evidence that a naturalized citizen needed help in her own language to tackle the complexities of the voting machine.
So this kind of flawed, individual, perfectly anecdotal claims of non-citizen voting, this kind of myth-making gets a huge boost by a surprise announcement out of Texas from the Texas Secretary of State in the spring of last year. And what was the claim there?
So, every once in a while, states have to go in and they have to clean out their voting rolls. They have to get rid of the names of people who died or moved. And we call this a voter purge. Names are removed from the rolls. And done properly, it's very important because you want to have accurate voter rolls. But Texas announced that...
Okay, I understand that if you're losing Glib Medley, you're losing America. Glib Medley is hoping to develop some new interests aside from politics. We've had a wonderful run the past 4 years, whether you love Trump or hate Trump. He's been an enormous source of psychic energy. Now you may be losing that psychic energy. You may feel a gap. And here's Bill Burr on movie racial stereotypes to fill that gap, bro.
I don't know. I rented that movie Pride recently. Have you guys seen that movie? Anybody see that? It's about the first all-black swim team and the difficulties they had to go through being the first all-black swim team. Let me ask you a question. How many of those white people are evil movies are they going to make? It's like it's all the way down to swimming. You know? I'm starting to run out of white guilt, you know? No, it's like those movies. They started off unbelievable. Started off with Roots, right? White guilt was at an all-time high. I could barely even watch it. I'm like, dude, I got it. My ancestors are evil. Okay, please turn the channel, dude. Please turn the channel. They're still hitting them. Fuck, turn the channel. This is going to be on all week. Jesus Christ, turn the channel. Then in the 80s, there was like a football movie. Then like Cuba Gooding wanted to be like a scuba diver. Remember that shit? And now it's all the way down to swimming. And I got to admit, I don't think I give a fuck. You know, I'm not trying to be a dick, but it's a recreational activity. Plus, I've been in pools. There's been black people in the pool, you know. I never saw any white guy, like, trying to, like, fucking, like, prevent people from getting into the pool. It's like, they just, like, making this shit up. I'm not being a dick here either, okay? Just to clarify, you know, I just want anybody coming up to me after the show, like, you know, I was thinking it, and then you fucking said it, and then... I'm not saying that I don't think black people should be allowed to put on some Speedos and go for a dip. I'm not saying that shit. I'm just saying these movies, like, the characters aren't even believable. Like, they always have to have, like, that, the over-the-top, uninhibited white racist character, you know? You know that guy? He's a guy, like, he's supposed to represent all the white evil, you know? He's like the dude they always have, like, screaming during the movie trailer. They'd be like, they were the first all-black swim team. Get out of the pool! He's got, like, a big vein in his forehead. Just screaming shit. Not even looking around, you know? Dude, it's ridiculous. Real racism is quiet. It's subtle. People look around first. Make sure that, you know, they make sure the coast is clear. There's disclaimers like, dude, you know I'm not racist, but these insert group name followed by fucked up conversation, right? That's how it goes down. Not just some guy just standing up there. There's Negroes in the pool. Do you approve of this? I work at the bank. Can I be fired immediately, please? The honest thing is, those movies, they're starting to give me a complex. You know, because anytime they do a movie about a group of people that thinks dumb shit about another group of people, it's always like white dudes. So it's like, are white dudes the only ones who think ignorant shit about other people, you know? No Mexican guy ever walked up to somebody from India like, dude, what the fuck is that? Is that like itchy? Fuck you? What is it? White dudes the only ones walking around, well, you guys don't eat cows? What are you, a bunch of fags?
Disavow.
Why are you wearing sandals? This guy's wearing sandals. This guy's a fag. You know, just balance the movies out a little bit. Like, just have some of the evil shit that black people say about white people, you know, when we're not around, you know? Like, well, what are some good examples, you know? You know, like, you know what I mean? You're hanging out, you had a rough day, you know? What are some of the classics? You know, what smell like wet dogs, right? You got head lice or something like that, right? Just slip some of that shit in there. Get out of the pool! Wash your hair, motherfucker! Right? Just make it seem a little more... Dude, I'm just saying, it's all the way down to swimming. I mean, where the fuck do you go from there? We do, like, ping pong? They were the first all-black ping pong team. They're gonna steal the paddles. Denzel Washington. My daughter's not playing ping pong! You got to go out there and show the white man your bag, ping pong.
Oh, yeah. Did you see Monday Night Football last night? It was such a triumph for America. It was such a triumph for humanity. It was, these guys are just like Rosa Parks on the bus. We had our first all-black officiating crew. I mean, that was fantastic. I can't wait till we have our all-first transgender crew, our all-first male homosexual crew. I mean, I can't get enough of it. Why is there no public demand for an, all Mexican-American officiating crew? But what a triumph for America. What a triumph for the human spirit. We had an all-black officiating crew. I was in tears watching the game. I was so deeply moved. I mean, I love this. We're supposed to think racially and tribally now. It's all A-okay.
No, I'm not saying, I don't know, it's always just weird bringing this shit up, but... No, I'm not saying white people aren't evil either, because I know we're evil. I got that evil in me. I do, that's why I can feel it. That's why I try to suppress it. I try to dress casual, you know what I mean? I'm serious, man. I tried a suit on the other day. I felt it coming up. Like, fuck, man, I want to take over some shit, right? I want to start telling people what to do. I want to go pollute a lake, blaming on my secretary, you know? Dude, I don't even like those movies when they make black and white people get along, man. Even those ones seem ridiculous, because there always has to be, like, some sort of lesson in those movies. Just like, I never looked at it that way. And it's like, that never happens, Anytime I've ever hung out with a black dude, at no point during the evening has he, try to, teach me how to dance, You know that interracial footloose moment they always have to have in those movies? And I never go to his neighborhood and, try to, save a school, How many times are they gonna make that movie? You know that movie? The white person goes into the projects. They just have to make a difference. They just made that movie again with, what was it, Hilary Swank? It's like, did you even need to go see it? It's like, let me guess, she shows up and they don't accept her, right? And she goes home, she cries to her effeminate boyfriend who's wearing sweatpants and he's cooking something for some reason, right? And he convinces her to give it one more chance, right? So then she goes back down there, she starts drawing out their inner beauty. Next thing you know, they put a do-rag on her, she starts fucking dancing. And it's just embarrassing for all races involved. For the love of God, stop making that fucking movie. Dude, the amount of times they made that movie, I would think I would know somebody white who actually did that shit, Just be like, that's Mike, yeah, he saves ghettos. That's what he does, I sit around, I watch Sports Center, he's in the projects every weekend. He's writing his name on the blackboard. My name's Mr. Michael. All right, who threw that? Who threw that? It's just annoying after a while, And it always fucking works out, too. Anytime the white person goes down there, I want to see a movie where it doesn't work out. Like the white dude goes down there the first day, just gets the shit kicked out of him, Just leaving all negative. You can't fucking help these people, You go down there, you try to do something nice. I couldn't get a goddamn word in. It's a $300 prescription.
They had found upwards of 90,000 non-citizens on their voting rolls who needed to be purged, and as many as 58,000 non-citizens voting in Texas elections. An astounding number. I mean, really, talk about a major scandal of voter fraud, the likes of which we haven't seen in this country for at least decades. It was pretty incredible. So the Secretary of State makes the claim, followed by tweets by the governor of Texas, from the attorney general, and later that weekend, President Donald Trump claims that there were close to 100,000 non-citizens on the Texas voter rolls, and they're going to be purged.
The Secretary of State had instructed counties to begin sending letters to specific individuals, warning them that they were going to be taken off the voter rolls and their registrations would be canceled if they didn't immediately, within the next 30 days, come in with documentary proof of U.S. citizenship. We reached out to people in the community and were able to find fairly quickly naturalized citizens who were receiving these purge letters. And this was, in fact, a pretty wide-scale voter purge that Texas had launched through, using the counties as their tool.
Okay, so this is not absurd. You can understand why people would regard this as voter suppression. This is real.
And the folks that were primarily targeted were naturalized citizens, people who had naturalized and registered to vote within about the past 7 years.
Remind me where they get this 90,000 number from?
So everything's bigger in Texas, including the number of people who become citizens. Nearly 1 million Texas residents had become naturalized citizens between 2007 and 2016. And they're comparing an old list of Texas citizens with their current voting rolls, and they're seeing people listed as non-citizens.
And so I see, particularly from our social betters over the past 9 months, all these exhortations to tip more than you normally would tip. So why subsidize people who make bad decisions? Right? Why I'm all for tipping, tip for good service. But why tip as some kind of moral statement? Why subsidize and distort people's economic incentives? If people choose to make poor decisions, why try to incentivize and subsidize them continuing to make bad decisions? Why not just tip for good service? Otherwise, tip just the socially appropriate amount. And if you feel bad, then volunteer. So I spend about 10 hours a week in 12-step service, and then I spend a few hours a week in other volunteering, and I also give about between 5 to 10% of my after-tax income to charity. But I don't go around tipping people just because they make bad decisions.
Citizens who actually are now citizens and are perfectly entitled to vote. So Nina Perales told me it was immediately obvious the number was based on flawed data.
It took about 5 minutes for everyone to figure out that Texas had used an old database of people who had gotten driver's licenses while they were still permanent resident immigrants. That information in no way accurately portrayed who was a U.S. citizen today.
The story unraveled and Maldiv went to court.
So Peter Zehan, he's the author of the book, The Accidental Superpower. He tweets, seeing more and more radicals, socialists, Greens are absolutely furious with what the incoming Biden administration is doing. On the other side, it is clear that the business community is done with the Trumpist Republican Party. Bloomberg and Forbes are the torchbearers for that community. They have turned pathologically hostile.
What we were facing at that time was close to 100,000 people.
So, yes, I expect Joe Biden to govern as he ran for president. He ran a very cautious operation. He ran a very cautious campaign. I expect him to govern in very cautious ways.
Who were going to receive purge letters. And even if 2 in 10 of them had failed to come in and provide their naturalization certificate, we could have seen 20,000 or more registered Texas voters cast off the voter rolls at that time. We were able to secure a temporary restraining order from the judge in San Antonio to protect our clients from being taken off the voter rolls. And the judge warned the Secretary of State very sternly that this problem needed to be fixed.
So Maldiv got some relief. The judge said that Texas was looking for a needle in a haystack of voter fraud out of 15 million Texas voters. The judge quoted from Robert Fulgham's book, All I Need to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten, that people need to clean up their own messes. But there was no apology. And the claims weren't retracted. And they're still floating around to be picked up again on social media. The Attorney General's tweet about this was liked 85,000 times, and it still appears on his Twitter feed. On top of all of this, Nina Perales says the damage was already done for some of her clients.
At least one of my clients expressed that she never wanted to vote again after this experience.
Okay, so I think it's understandable why objective observers would describe this as voter suppression. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar want to block Joe Biden's former chief of staff. So the left is furious with the incoming Biden administration. These 2 congresspeople are boosting a petition against Joe Biden, nominating his former chief of staff to a new role in his administration. They call Bruce Reed a deficit hawk. So progressives are mounting their pressure campaign after the president-elect did not include any, zip, zero, zilch of their favored candidates in his first slate of cabinet nominees. and they're serious about installing some of their allies and blocking anyone who doesn't pass their purity test, and they plan to make noise if they are not heard. So far, Joe Biden looks like he is going to govern very cautiously. Left-wing Democrats want a seat at the table. They don't want the Biden-Harris administration to morph into a cautious third Obama term.
Even though she was a naturalized U.S. citizen and had every right. It wasn't just about taking people who were registered to vote and who were legitimate voters off the voter rolls. It was about sending threatening letters to people who then would become very worried that they had done something wrong, and ultimately a number of them would be deterred. A great deal of damage has already been done to immigrant voters who proudly became U.S. citizens and who now don't want to vote.
And Rick, David Whitley, Secretary of State there, his career does not get boosted from all this either, right?
Well, Democrats.
And let's go to a quick clip here from Rabbi Yosef Mizrachi. Says being a Democrat makes you
all you need
wicked.
is to ask a person who you voted for. That's, you already know if he's righteous or wicked. If he told you Democrats, you know right away he's wicked. If he told you Republican, maybe he's wicked, maybe he's righteous. There's a chance that he's righteous, but no guarantee. Okay, maybe he's Mechalel Shabbat, maybe he's Itaref. He supports Republicans' ideas, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, anti-all kinds of things. But in his action, he could be very wicked. It doesn't mean just because he voted Republican or to the right that he's righteous. But at least there is a chance. You understand what I'm saying? If he keeps Torah and mitzvot and he believes in Hashem and follow and this, plus he has the right political views, then he could be righteous. If he's not Shomer mitzvot, there's nothing to talk about righteous. There's no such thing, ani dati balev, Rabbi. I'm religious in my heart. This is an illusion, a dream. The opposite, someone that comes and says, I'm religious in my mind or in my heart or in my opinions, right, is the biggest criminal. More than these lefties. Why? Because if a lefty liberal comes, communist, and speaks against the Torah and the religious people, it comes from ignorance. He never read the Torah, he doesn't know anything from his life. He went through massive brainwash and he became a hater of religion. If a person comes and says, I believe in God, the Torah is from him, the rabbis are right 100%, Rabbi, I'm with you 100%, I'm very much, I support you, I fight for you in the internet. Do you keep Shabbat? No. Do you eat kasher? No. You're more wicked than them. They have no idea what they live for. You already know. They don't know they rebel against God. They just think that we are stupid. We believe in something that doesn't exist. But you know all the truth and you behave like this, you're worse than them.
Okay, so I don't believe that voting Democrat makes you a wicked person. To me, voting Democrat simply indicates that you experience the world differently than I do. And you may well be right. I voted for George W. Bush twice, and what a disaster he was. All right, let's get a little bit more from the Amicus podcast on Slate. This is Dahlia Lithwick talking to election law professor Rick Hazen.
Democrats, even though they're in a minority in the Texas legislature, managed to scuttle his confirmation, and he's no longer the Secretary of State of Texas.
Okay, so this is where this question of voter suppression becomes extra tricky, right? And Nina Perales a little bit flicked at it there. On the one hand, we have big numbers. We have 3 to 5 million fraudulent vote. On the other, there is actually a number that we can put on the number of people who are purged from the voter rolls. We know that number too. But we cannot, right, and I think Nina says this, even begin to estimate how many folks who experience all this and are deterred from ever going to their polling place again. What's the answer to that?
So there is no good answer. I mean, there are lots of things we could do. One thing we could do is adopt online voter registration in Texas, something that I think would make it much easier in a place like Texas with its vast distances for people to be able to register to vote. But I think you've really hit on something important, which is that regardless of whether these suppressive voting laws are swinging elections, regardless of whether they're skewing turnout in favor of Republicans against Democrats, if you think about it, the level of each voter, you've really deprived those voters of their dignity for no good reason. With states putting up roadblocks, it's making it harder for some people to register to vote, and it has no basis to do it other than crass political calculation. And that's really the main story of this and why this is so depressing.
We've got fake election fraud on the one hand, actual suppression and purging of rolls. Is that everything we need to be worried about going into 2020?
Were it only true. I think it's actually worse than that. And it turns out that if you're worried about your vote counting, You might have more to worry about if you're in the city of Detroit or in Broward County, Florida.
Okay, so Dahlia Lithwick is definitely on the left. Rick Hasen seems fairly centrist, maybe even center-left a little bit. That doesn't mean you don't listen to people on the left. These are thoughtful, intelligent people, and Rick Hasen has great expertise in this issue of voter fraud. So I would rather listen to educated, intelligent, accomplished people on the left than bloviating pundits on the right.
Than you do if you're in a jurisdiction in Texas. And that's because incompetence knows no particular party affiliation. We have incompetent Democrats, we have incompetent Republicans, but we have...
Okay, incompetence knows no political party affiliation, but it does strike me from my experience in life that certain groups tend to be more competent than other groups. And so cities, counties that are, say, dominated by generally incompetent groups, I would expect to have more voter incompetence.
Some places where your vote may not count, not because someone's trying to disenfranchise you, but because they simply don't know how to run an election.
Okay, so lots more to come. Our Election Meltdown series continues next week.
Okay, so this is on the Amicus
Aside from
MacArthur Genius Fellow at
election law world, as these
myth of widespread voter fraud and how it bolsters subsequent voter suppression. And this week, we're turning to what, Rick? Incompetence?
Yeah, so, voter suppression is...
Okay, so it's very easy to say that these intellectuals are cranks. Show me where what they're saying is factually incorrect. Now, I have differed logically with Rick Hasen here, so I think he's a bona fide election law expert. I disagree with him on logical grounds at times, but it's effortless to just dismiss people as cranks. What you need to do is to point out errors in logic and in their facts.
Sexy, I think, in the election law world, as these things go, if that's our scale. And talking about competence in election administration sounds like it's about as boring as it can be. But when you hear some of the things that have actually gone on, it's going to, raise the hair on the back of your neck. Small mistakes in election administration can snowball into big problems. Big mistakes can throw something as huge as who won the presidency into question. And remember, as we talked about last week, my main concern with thinking about both voter suppression and thinking about incompetence is how is this undermining people's trust in the fairness of elections? If you think that people can't competently count the votes, that's a good reason to be worried about the fairness of elections. So some of the podcast listeners probably are old enough to remember Bush versus Gore and the 2000 election with its famous hanging chads and voting machines that didn't work and the inability to figure out if people were voting for Bush or Gore or Pat Buchanan. There was a famous Jews for Buchanan vote. You may remember this, the butterfly ballot. All of this is probably bringing back some terrible memories for some of your listeners. But some of your listeners were probably too young or not paying attention back at that time. The upshot of the 2000 election was that we had a lot of problems with how we ran our elections. One study found that about 1 million votes across America were lost in 2000 due to incompetence in how votes were being counted.
And a friend notes, Trump last month said if Joe Biden wins, your 401k will crash. Now we have Dow Jones and other indices up about 10% to record highs. Thanks for playing.
I think that almost 20 years after Bush versus Gore, we would have gotten better. It hasn't worked out that way, at least not everywhere. You could look at Broward County, Florida. That was a huge mess. But we're going to focus on another case, one that's gotten a lot less attention than Brenda Snipes in Broward County, Florida, and her problems with counting votes in 2018. And one that could be very important, which is the case of Detroit, Michigan.
And Slate Plus members will actually be getting more insight into what's going on with elections in Detroit and Michigan.
At precincts during elections, there's difficulty in Detroit.
Confidence in
the scene in.
Find at slate.com/amicus plus.
But before we speak to Secretary Benson, I spoke to another Michigander. He's been following elections closely there for a long time.
So my name is Joel Kurth. I am the managing editor of Bridge Magazine in Michigan. We're a long-form nonprofit public policy journal. And before that, I was the editor of investigations at the Detroit News. I was the lead reporter in the 2016 election meltdown involving Detroit's unrecountable precincts.
There's this thing I call the weakest link axiom of election administration. The accuracy of an election system and voters' confidence in that system is only as strong as the weakest parts of that system. And the case of Detroit and more broadly Michigan is an example of this.
I've been a reporter in Detroit for about 15 years, and with every election in Detroit, there's allegations of misvoting, lost ballots. Ballots have been found in the trunks of cars. There's often power outages at precincts during elections. There's difficulty counting ballots.
So remember, the way that Trump surprisingly won the 2016 election is that he won a narrow electoral college victory in 3 Midwestern states.
Okay, meanwhile, what's going on with Donald Trump and his legal challenges? No good news for Trump supporters.
After setbacks, Trump looks beyond legal fight. Publicly, President says he will never concede. Privately, he is focused on his political future as Biden transition moves forward. By Rebecca Ballhaus and Catherine Lucy. November 24, 2020, 3:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Washington. President Trump has publicly vowed to keep up the fight to overturn the election. Privately, advisors say the president has suggested he knows the battle is effectively over.
Whoops. I shouldn't have done that.
After setbacks, Trump looks beyond legal. Ballhaus and Catherine Lucy. Advisors say the president has suggested he knows the battle is effectively over and has begun to turn his attention to his next act. 3 states whose results Trump lawyers had contested, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, certified their results this week. The Trump legal team and its allies have lost dozens of rulings in several states, including a particularly critical dismantling of their case in Pennsylvania by a federal judge on Saturday. And on Monday evening, the General Services Administration said it would begin formally providing federal resources for President-elect Joe Biden to begin a transfer of power, a move the president said he recommended but didn't amount to a concession. "We are moving full speed ahead," Mr. Trump tweeted late Monday. He said he would never concede to the fraud he has alleged swayed the outcome of the election. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. But privately, even the few advisors to the president, who had argued he still had a shot over the last week, now largely concede he has no path to victory, aides say. The GSA's decision to move forward with the transition on Monday cemented the inevitability of a power transfer that White House officials had seen coming for weeks. "It's not like it was much of a surprise," said one administration official. "There is universal realization among White House staff," said another person close to the administration, "it's over." Jenna Ellis, a legal advisor to the Trump campaign, said our legal strategy has not changed, nor has the president's commitment to fight for election integrity. She said Rudy Giuliani, Mr. Trump's personal attorney who is leading his legal effort, and other lawyers on the team speak with the president several times a day. The White House didn't respond to a request for comment. A week ago, aides had described the president as fixated on his legal battle and the various unfounded allegations his team was floating, asking advisors for their opinions on Dominion Voting Systems Corporation, a little-known voting machine and software supplier that his lawyers have accused of masterminding an election fraud conspiracy. The lawyers haven't provided evidence to back up their claims, and the company has called the accusations dangerous and absurd. More recently, administration officials say, the president's focus appears to have broadened. In private conversations, he has polled advisors on what he should do next, musing about how he can stay relevant in the media and in the Republican Party and how he can earn money. He has repeatedly expressed interest in running for president again in 2024, which some advisors have urged him to do as a way to save face, telling him he can decide whether to follow through later. People close to the president don't expect him to formally concede or ignore.
Okay, what's going on with Tim Pool? And
Yeah, well,
Alex
you
Jones?
know this. Like, look, yes, the Tim Pool is a fence sitter meme is true. It's, in fact, I asked people, what's the number one thing you want me to ask Tim about? First of all, why you were so easy on Vaush and so hard on Alex. The second one was.
That's not even true. I was yelling at Vaush.
I couldn't watch it. It was just looking at him. He looked dirty, and I hope that this. Actually, it's not fair to take shots. He's not here. But
we were yelling. Like we exchanging words, and then we'd simmer down, and then we'd be calm, and then I'd start yelling. We did it for like 4 hours with Alex.
I thought you were pretty rough on Alex. But you had him on a short leash. I should say. I'll say that. I think he was on a really short leash. But as also a fellow content creator, I can totally understand why.
I brought him on. He could say whatever he wanted.
Not really.
Like what do you mean?
Well, I'm just saying, like, he can't say whatever he wants.
That's not him, though. I told him he can talk about what he wants to talk about. I'm not going to tell him what to say.
Right.
I'm going to disagree. You know, I think people might not understand that. Like, I probably don't agree with him on a lot of things.
You and Alex. Yeah.
But I'll tell you this. You know, when they pulled the episode, I immediately said to Alex and Michael, "Come back on the show. We're doing it again."
He was pissed, and then it seemed like it simmered down. Right? Alex was pretty salty about it.
I talked to him right away when they pulled it down.
Yeah.
Because what happened with Alex Jones was that he made a comment about firing squads.
Yeah.
And
don't repeat it.
Yeah. No. I thought he said something about it.
It was but not an actual thing.
It was
like,
sarcastic call for
misheard. Yeah.
And so, but everyone here after the show, like we all kind of thought.
I figured that they're gonna get you.
No,
Somebody from
like,
YouTube was watching it. Guaranteed.
Yeah. Like it was only after the show that Alex said that's not what I said, and then I was like, oh, because after the show,
you guys reacted immediately when
Tim
both you and
was
Mike.
like, no,
and Mike even reacted.
Yes, I mean both of you.
Yeah. So we all kind of thought that he said something that he shouldn't have said, and then I immediately contacted YouTube and said, "Yo, this is a mistake." They said, "We'll get back to you." I emailed them again. We'll get back to you.
Yeah,
but
we'll get back to you.
In the meantime, I said, open invite for Alex to come back on the show.
He said he would come back as far as.
But he's got a family and he's got his own job, and so we ended up having Michael back. And I don't, Alex owes me no favors.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure, like, when YouTube pulled the show, people were like, oh, Tim's not going to fight back, whatever. I'm like, dude, I come back on the show.
Why wouldn't you? It'd be one of the most popular Timcasts ever. Why would you not want to?
Seriously,
have that on? But I'm not even worried about it.
I know you don't care. Just let me pretend you care.
Everyone would love to see Alex again.
Yeah. I want. I feel like there. I have my lines. I have my boundaries. If it's arbitrary and a waste of time and energy that can get me banned, then I wouldn't do it. Like saying certain names or whatever. But if it's an issue of doing an interview and having a conversation with a guy who's been maligned for the most part, then I absolutely will be like, no, come back. That's BS. And then we would literally bring up, that's not true. That was a mistake. YouTube amended their statement. They basically said at first, he made a comment about wanting a thing for a specific guy.
Yep.
Once we realized that wasn't true, they issued a public statement saying he just made a blanket statement about executions.
Yeah, but wasn't he like saying as a metaphor? Didn't he mean like these?
Well, that's what he's. So all I can say is what he said.
No, I don't want to. Yeah.
Well, I'm not gonna repeat it, but he said I agree with Bill Gates about a specific thing.
Yeah, right.
And then he on his show said it was a metaphor for vaccines or whatever.
Right. That's how I understand how it was perceived. Right.
It's not about. I didn't. We thought he said something different.
Yeah. Well, he talks fast.
But the issue is that YouTube is sitting there shaking with their finger on the band, say it.
Yeah.
Oh, he did it.
3 hours and you only had 1 second of a slip up. That's pretty incredible. I mean, I thought at least they would like tell you, all right, bro, just delete it. But we both know that's not how communicating. What most people don't know is. Even Tim with his 700 or 800 gold play buttons that are outside.
Yeah, that's true.
He doesn't even actually bricks in the backyard. It's just these gold play buttons.
The whole house is just layered
gold
play buttons.
Gold play buttons.
He has a bunker downstairs that's lined with them. But they don't care about you. Like they cared about that episode. But like even having a million I said this to people all the time. I'm like, I have I'm not as many as Tim. I'm like, people are like, bro, can you just help out? Can you get email YouTube to help out? No,
we can't.
I have 950,000 subscribers after tonight. After all of you subscribe, almost 1 million. Ooh. But they don't give a shit about me. I can't call anybody.
I remember PewDiePie complaining about this. Y'all know who PewDiePie is?
I've
I used to like watching him.
Yeah,
he's the #1 YouTuber, and he's complaining constantly about them.
Yeah.
I can send an email.
Ethan can call.
I have a double review process. So if a video gets demonetized, I submit it for review, and then if they confirm it, I can submit it again manually.
Oh, I don't get
directly
that.
to Google.
That's the tinfoil stock.
You want to know exactly what it is? It's that I am a traditional liberal, fed up with the Democrats and the left going nuts. Like many liberals who have found themselves questioning what the Democrats are doing and realizing that they're out of it and Trump is the best bet. Thus, YouTube is essentially, the way to describe it is there's like the Overton window. But imagine a wheel, right? A half wheel. And then you've got far right, center, left, and far left. They want the wheel to rotate.
Right.
And then what happens is when they ban a right-wing YouTuber, it makes Tim Pool liberal become Tim Pool centrist.
Right.
Then when they rotate the wheel again, Tim Pool centrist becomes Tim Pool right-wing. But what they
far
want...
right wing.
No, eventually. Yeah. What they want is all of those people...
Goals for Tim.
They want all of those people who are on YouTube and users not to leave. So they're like, we need to make sure we have a liberal that they'll watch. Yeah. And so not every conservative likes me, but YouTube promotes, and they've taken my channels off the blacklist. That's surprising. So they're clearly watching.
Well, I've talked about, here's some inside baseball. That's fun for people because all those people out there love to hear about YouTube analytics. But there is a very real thing that channels can go under review. I've got it down. So my channel recently went under review. It's always 23 days. It's happened to me twice this year, and I predicted the exact end of it, and sure enough. So starting like November 1st, I think I stopped gaining subs for like 23 days, and I've been gaining 1,000 to 2,000 every single day for like 3 straight months. Yeah, stopped, and then 23 days later, which was like last week, started again.
What?
And that happened again back in August. So my guess is they also put channels in this like
borderline content.
Yeah, right. Well, we need a review. We need to, he made a video where he made an edgy joke. So now you're in the.
I have this thing that it pops up from time to time where I can't get monetized right away or demonetized at all. So it'll say pending review.
Oh, mine always say that every time.
Yeah, and then I can't challenge it. I can't do anything until 20 minutes or half an hour later.
Sometimes it takes hours. This past week it's been very slow. But did you get a strike?
For Alex Jones, we got a warning.
Yeah, I burned up my warning too, so now you have no more warnings.
And that means if we get another strike, we can't do anything for 2 weeks. The good news is
2 week vacation?
No,
it's not a vacation.
No.
Well, I asked them because there's a circumvention rule where if your channel gets a strike and you can't upload to another channel.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, but I was told specifically if you already have different channels that do different things,
okay,
it doesn't apply to you.
Well, hopefully everyone will just be really generous in the super chat tonight to just in case you ever get a day off or something like that. By the way,
I took a day off a couple weeks ago, like after the election, because I was like,
how'd that feel?
Meh. I rode my bike 32 miles.
That's not a day off.
It was brutal. It was intense. My legs were
These roads are dangerous out here.
No, it was the trails. Yeah, it was the trail. So Yeah, I guess it wasn't a day off.
Let me ask you about
Really
this.
wasn't, no.
Here's something that I think that people might want to know as I take over the interview here. The here's something I often try to describe to people that you must feel even more than I do. The golden handcuffs of YouTube, right? Like if you take a day off, like for guys like us who the video is relevant for 24 hours for the most part.
Yep.
So if you take a day off, you make zero money. You know, there's not a lot of carryover.
A little bit.
Yeah,
If you're like doing videos every day, you'll see like you'll make like 20% of your revenue is from the previous day.
Right. It'll carry over in the morning.
But
like,
2 or 3 days off and then you're down to nothing.
Yeah. How do you? Because I haven't figured it out yet. I'm just working every day. Do you take Sundays off?
No.
Yeah. I do. I don't take Sundays off, but I film for Monday.
No, I work.
How long is this sustainable?
Probably until I just die, I guess. Until
Right?
at a very young age, my heart explodes. And
Right, yeah,
Not allowed. I don't
yeah.
need CPR.
my eyes like just start bugging out one show. I'm like,
I hope it's on a live stream. 'Cause that would just be that would be.
But we're about to launch another show.
Why not? I mean, who needs sleep?
So here's how it works.
No one.
I wake up at about 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And then I immediately pick up my phone and I start going through notifications and messages and emails, reading Twitter. Then I get up and I go about the quick morning routine.
You do 3 in the morning on Timcast, right? Normally.
Well, so I do 3 at 6, 6:15, and 6:30
a.m.
p.m.
Oh, p.m.
I have 10, 1, 4, and then 6, 6:15, 6:30. Those are the shorter segments that are
Yeah.
But
short for you.
About 10 minutes. They're about,
that is super short.
Yeah, they're usually about 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
And I do that because they're usually stories that don't have much bigger context around them.
Yeah.
So throughout the day, when I'm pulling up all this news, I find stories where it's like, it's actually a big story. And but I wake up at about 8. I work from 8 to about 4. And then from 4 until about 6 is exercise and food.
Yep.
And then we start getting ready for this show. So we the guest comes down, we'll hang out, we'll talk, we'll kind of warm up the conversation. And then we do the show until usually around a little after 10.
Yeah.
And then I probably fall asleep around 11 or so. You like kind of wind down, figure out where our guest's going to be staying and everything like that. So what we're going to do is that period between 4 and 6 where I'm usually just skating is we're going to hire someone to film a vlog. We're going to do at the house, skating, video games, shenanigans.
Don't you think you need that decompressed time though? You need that time off.
But so here's the thing. Before we start doing the show, you know what we'd be doing right now if the show didn't exist?
Talking about this?
Exactly.
So
what would happen is like I would finish my show and then we'd be sitting in the game room with like sodas or chips or beer talking about all this crazy stuff. And I was like, why don't we just film it and start a show or whatever?
Yeah. Why not work? Why would I not be working right now?
But it becomes an obligation and that changes everything.
Right.
And
it's
so
not
now,
fun anymore.
I mean, it is fun.
Well, when I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, your alternative is that you don't look to YouTube for your living. So if you just keep chasing the algorithm, no one is forcing you to work every day on your YouTube videos. This is the choice that you make. It may be enticing, but it's up to you. Like I take several days off, 3 days off in a row.
You're doing pretty good, you know. Yeah. No, but it is fun. It's fun. Like we just sit down and we hang out. Like we were talking even before this.
Yeah.
And it was like usually we'd tell people like, wait, save it, don't say it. So I gotta go back up. We're gonna do the show. And so when I took a day off that one Sunday, I rode my bike. I'm just I get back.
Now that is true. If you have someone you want to bring on the show, don't talk about it first, because when you say something for a second time, it just drains it of passion, and you can tell in someone's voice when they've told a story many times already. The story is going to be much more flat.
I'm lying on a beanbag and I'm like, this is boring.
Yeah.
I want to complain about stuff. You know?
My wife,
where's my camera?
Yeah, my wife is concerned that I may just die at my desk. Which, by the way, like that's the true dignity. Like I want to die at my desk. You know, I don't want this like retirement, sitting around doing nothing. But I do wonder. Like I worry about you because I know what it does to me, and I only work 6 days a week, and I don't do a nightly show. But you seem to be holding up all right. I mean, I saw 40, 60 bottles of Adderall downstairs, so I assume.
Oh, more than that. No.
That was just the main.
I had a migraine earlier. I worked through it. I won't even take it.
Yeah, you were griping about that when I got here.
Migraine, was I?
Not really, but
I mentioned.
I'm just trying to add some spice.
Come on.
Yeah.
I'm trying to add some spice.
I was wailing. Oh,
yeah. He was rolling around.
My brain was like, and they give me the pills that give me modafinil or Provigil. It's called. You know what that is?
No. Super migraine stuff.
It makes it so you don't have to sleep.
Oh, cool.
I love modafinil.
There's one episode of American.
I love modafinil. Oh, first thing every morning. My modafinil.
American Dad, where they have like this hypothetical CIA pill, and so like Stan's taking it, and then like his wife finds out, and she gets pissed because he's like up playing Beatman, like video games all night long, and like that would be nice to not sleep.
Like she starts taking it too, and then he's like,
yeah,
like I guess snipers take it, like astronauts take it, because like you just don't get tired or whatever or something like that.
I can't imagine you can do that long.
Yeah, no.
I think I got it. I planned this all out. I said years ago when I was like, when I started advice, I asked them, I was like, can you give me the point where I have no free time? And they laughed like, because like I'll tell you, man, they're lazy. Not the higher ups. Those guys work to the bone, but most people were just lazy.
Yeah.
Like sometimes they don't even show up.
Most people are lazy.
Yeah.
Not just vice people.
That's aren't you bored? You know? Don't you want to like build a treehouse, like jump off a building? I don't know.
I just think you're wired different. Like I don't like look down at people who enjoy downtime. I'm not saying you do either, but
okay, let's get back to the more exciting and more important issue of election fraud. This is Dahlia Lithwick speaking with law professor Richard Hausen.
If it's fair to call Pennsylvania Midwestern.
And a journalist in Michigan,
Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the margin across the 3 states was 80,000 votes.
Donald Trump won by about 10,000 votes in unofficial election results in Michigan. And it was razor thin, obviously. We're talking about 5 million ballots cast. A few days after the election, I got a phone call from a pretty good source that says there's not going to be able to count the ballots in Detroit. And I think the person was trying to tip me off because there's a law in Michigan that says unreconciled votes cannot be recounted.
So Jill Stein, you remember her? She was the Green.
Okay, so pizza delivery 50-year-old incel bro, better known as Ultra Testosterone, is back in the chat. And bro, if you double majored as an undergraduate in mathematics and chemistry, how can you stand my comparatively low IQ show? I am not as smart as you. I don't know who is as smart as you. What do you do? Come on, man. Like, you must have 2 standard deviations of IQ on me. I could not graduate with a degree in mathematics to save my life. I've extended Kevin Michael Grace 4 invites, so I extended him one today. I'd love to have Kevin Michael on to debate, but at the beginning of the show, I was debating Halsey English on this. But pizza delivery guy, how can you stand my show if you received degrees in mathematics and degrees in chemistry? I am so much less intelligent than you are. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, you are so far above me where you can just rewind the stream and listen to it at 2x speed. So the first 50 minutes of the show is me debating Halsey. But I don't get it. If you have a degree in mathematics and you have a degree in chemistry, I mean, you must feel like you're really slumming it here, because there's no way that I am cognitively nearly as sharp as you are. So no, Halsey English has the exact same positions that you do. Pizza delivery 50-year-old incel bro. He sounds exactly like you, bro. No, I really appreciate that you like my show. You know, I am grateful. But you can be honest with me. We're just going to be naked here with our emotions. Don't you feel like you're slumming it? The only way that I passed chemistry in high school was that I cheated. I cheated all the way through chemistry class. I'm not proud of this, but I befriended this nerdy guy, and I just told him I was going to take advantage of the surroundings, and I just cheated my way through chemistry. I don't think I would have been cognitively capable of passing my high school chemistry class. That you got a degree in chemistry, let alone Rushton, who has a PhD in chemistry. I mean, I'm nowhere near as intelligent. So you weren't slumming it, bro. I miss the wignats and the incel dude, Lucy, from yesterday. I just don't like how you think the experts are right on everything. I don't believe the experts are right on everything, but we need heuristics. Heuristics. No, you said you have an undergraduate degree in chemistry. I couldn't even pass a high school class in chemistry, bro. Like, I took geometry twice in high school, and I got C grades each time. And then I took beginning algebra at community college, and then the next semester of algebra, and I think I got C or C minus grades. I barely passed beginning algebra in community college. Then I finally got my act together. I got an A in trigonometry, and then I was cruising towards an A in calculus at community college, but I got really sick. So I limped to the finish line and I got a B in calculus. And then when I took second quarter calculus at UCLA, I had to drop out. I was just too sick. But I did have my UCLA calculus professor. He said that I thought like a mathematician. He said something incredibly flattering about my ability to grasp some mathematical concept. Now, he may have just been whatever. I don't have your levels of accomplishment in mathematics or chemistry, man. I mean, I had to work so hard to get through trigonometry, right? After just barely making it through beginning and intermediate algebra at community college, right? I would get up at 4 a.m., right? I'd get up at 4 a.m. weekdays. No, I'd get up at 4 a.m. every day to do my trigonometry homework. And the reason it was so difficult was that, I didn't really learn algebra. I didn't learn it in high school. I didn't learn it in community college. I just wanted to take as little mathematics as possible. And then I decided I wanted to study economics. And so I realized that I need to get serious about math. So I'd always try to put in as little effort as possible in math prior to that. Then I realized, hey, I want to do a PhD in economics. I better get serious. So I decided to get serious. I get up at 4 a.m. to study my trigonometry and then study my calculus. But the biggest problem I had in calculus was that I never learned algebra. So I was getting up at 4 a.m. to relearn algebra and trigonometry and geometry and then calculus. Like the actual new material in calculus wasn't difficult to comprehend. Problem was I'd never put any effort into mathematics before. I stumbled through basic algebra, and so now I'm essentially relearning algebra, relearning geometry, learning trigonometry, learning calculus. And so I'd get up at 4 a.m. 7 days a week, put in 2 hours at my peak cognitive time, 4 to 6 a.m. Then I'd eat breakfast and drive off to my community college. Wow. So let's learn a little bit more here from law professor Rickhausen.
Party candidate that many Democrats think cost Clinton the election in some of these places. Jill Stein demands a recount. The Clinton campaign, they don't think that they're going to win in a recount, but they decide to act as observers. And Michigan has these very strict regulations, as Joel said.
So my economics professor at UCLA, I took him for 2 classes, was Russell Roberts. He does the Econ Talker podcast now, and he's fairly well known in libertarian circles. He's been on the cover of magazines. He was incredibly erudite and excellent professor. He was also a Baal Tshuva, someone who grew up Jewish but then became an Orthodox Jew. So we probably had 24 or more stimulating conversations about Orthodox Judaism and wide-ranging ethical issues, economic issues after class. So at the time when I was at UCLA in 1988, 1989, I was a Marxist, or at least I said I was.
To the OPEC nations or to Russia for that matter. And it just doesn't make any sense to me to move away from those great energy sources that are cheap and abundant and made in America. But it looks like that's going to be one of Joe Biden's top priorities.
You know, I know I'm not saying anything profound here, Steve, but you've indulged that over the years we chatted. I know elections have consequences. The president's still fighting the outcome of this one. I get that and all. But he reversed or tried to, even with executive orders, if Congress wasn't moving fast enough, everything, or as many things as he could under Barack Obama. It's very, very clear some of these early moves, including planned executive orders under Joe Biden, will do the same to whatever Donald Trump was doing. It's got to confuse the world, right? I mean, it's one thing. These aren't minor adjustments. These are 180s after 180s, you know?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, Biden is going to reverse a lot of the most positive things we did on health care, on deregulation. You mentioned the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran deal. What's going to happen with that? So, yeah, you know, I'm not a big fan, by the way, of legislating through executive action. We do have a legislative branch, Congress, and this governing by executive order is sort of putting these powers into the hands of the executive branch that belong with the legislature. But, you know, Trump's record on the economy has been really nothing short of spectacular. I was listening to your previous conversation about Dow 30,000. I mean, really, that's a pretty amazing thing given what we've been through this past year, Neil. When you think about, we've had a pandemic that flattened the economy for the first half of the year. You know, we had all these businesses struggling. Now we have this vaccine. I really think Trump is going to be going out on a very triumphant note. And I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't.
Do you ever think, though, in your heart of hearts, Steve, I mean, you can wonder about the timing of these vaccine announcements that came out a week after the election. Dow 30,000. Yeah. If we had seen that right before the election, do you think it would have been a different outcome?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. If the election were held today, I don't think there's any question Donald Trump would be elected by a pretty wide margin, because we've had those two developments: a vaccine, which is a miracle. I mean, 9 months to develop a vaccine, and the second thing is, you know, we got the monster jobs report.
The irony was many who turned away from the president turned away because they didn't think he was doing as good a job on the virus. Do you think in the end, in retrospect, had he been more aggressive about the mask thing, had he been more aggressive about everyone being on the same page with this, that he would have another 4 years in the White House?
I think that the news that we've seen in the last few weeks has been extraordinary. I think people are upbeat. Even, by the way, in the area that I work on, the economy, even I think a majority of Biden voters said that Trump would be better on the economy. I think Trump, what tripped him up with some of his behavior and some of his actions that, just rubbed people the wrong way. But I'm very proud. I have to say, I'm very proud of the job this president did on the economy, and I'm proud to have been a small part of it. And I think as the months roll on, I think people are going to look back and say,
So I remember when I was getting ready to transfer to UCLA to study economics, and I was looking at the Encyclopedia Britannica, the entry on macroeconomics and the entry on microeconomics. And I think I shared with my mother that the encyclopedia said that there'd never been an integration between micro and macroeconomics. And my stepmother, she said to me, well, maybe that will be your contribution. I remember in Russell Roberts' class one day, I went up on the blackboard. I was talking a lot about my favorite books on Marxism, and one of the books that I listed up on the blackboard was the Karl Marx essay on the Jewish question. And there was this guy with a yarmulke who I believe I became friendly with about 12 years later. He raised his hand and said, well, what's that about? And I said, well, yeah, there is some anti-Semitic stuff. Just ignore that. It's that Karl Marx saw the Jews as embodying capitalism. Now, economics has predictive value in some things, but macroeconomics maybe not so much. But yes, in microeconomics, I think there's some predictive value.
At that bar the other day, and somebody said that they were going to vote for Biden. I'm fucking never going back. I'm not speaking to my brother-in-law anymore because he's a liberal. Like people like that, I don't understand that mentality of like, fuck that man. Today, we got a lot of butthurt people, the wignats and what have you, and a lot of these people that have been leaving comments all day. And there were people that we had to basically fucking ban in the chat room for a couple of reasons. One, we had a bunch of wignats surge into our fucking chat room, mostly people from like Poll and shit, and people who, they've never watched our show before, they don't care about us, they don't donate to the show, they don't fucking retweet the show links out, they don't, you know what I mean, they're not part of this. But a bunch of new names that sprung up all day long about, you're not going to call him out for this, you're not going to call him out for this. And it's like, dude, I've never claimed to, we've never advertised our show as an ambush show. Like, we're not Opie and Anthony. We're not. People attribute that shit to us as like, oh, you guys are just like Opie and Anthony. Like, we're not the guys that are like, let's trick some people into coming on our show and then ambush them. It'll be hilarious. But these are these fucking, oh, by the way, I'm glad the guy actually commented so I can ban him here too. These fucking broke, and they're broke fucking wignats. And by the way, let me describe all of these people. All of these J-woke wignats that are fucking always bitching that nobody's J-woke enough for them. Nobody's spurging out about Jews enough for these people. You know what I mean? But these are people that like, these are white people with fucking missing teeth and felonies and you know what I mean? That they're dirtbag people that do like drywall for a living. And you know what I mean? Like they're these kind of people. That fucking are so angry. They're so angry, right? Because they're used to watching what they like, which is shows like Handsome Truth. Like guys like GDL people. The guys that basically spurg out about Jews for 4 hours straight. Every show has the word goy in the title, and they have Patrick Little on, and they're doing their show for what? Half a dozen wignats who are spelling N towers out in their fucking chat rooms. What's that going to get you? What does preaching to the fucking choir get you? Honest question to all you fucking angry fucking purity spiraling wignats out there. What does that accomplish? Like who's coming around and seeing our side of things if you're in a fucking room with 6 people who already agree with you going, man, I fucking hate black people, am I right? Yeah, fucking joggers, am I right? Yeah, man, fucking joggers, dude. Yeah, fucking let's spell the N-word out in the chat room, dude. Bro, that would be so fucking cool. What is that accomplishing? Like who's like, do you think like, you know what I mean? A fucking some kind of like some random fucking flight attendant like that maybe like politically neutral is going to tune in on some kind of YouTube show or something like Bitwave? You think some fucking normie that's gonna fucking maybe have their they might be open to hearing things. They might be open to hearing a side of it. But what do they see? They see fucking 12 spurging basically. Oh goddamn Spurg fest, and it gets nothing done. It gets nothing done. So to the people that wanted us to somehow sabotage ourselves today, to the people that said we didn't. What would you like us to ambush our next guests with? Like what would you like us, instead of having a good first interview with somebody, having a good little fucking rapport, and then going, hey man, let's get you on another time, and then come on another time, and you go a little bit deeper that time, and then you go, oh man, we had a great second show, come on another time, and then someday which is what you fucking, which is what the Spurgs never understand, because you're narcissistic, mentally ill people who, if anybody's not doing it exactly your way, they're fucking dead. They're degenerates. They all need to go in the oven. That's how you people think, right? That's why you're not getting anything done in life. That's why nobody's ever going to give a fuck what your opinion is on foreign policy, or, you know what I mean, or globalization. Nobody's going to care because you're a fucking Spurg. You know, like it's you got to leave it sometimes to people who know how to talk to people to talk about things. You guys are not, some of you are not good at this. So yeah, like fucking, somebody says cuckbox Heimbach. Look, say what you want about Matt Heimbach. Was he fat? Yes. Was he dumb sometimes? Yes. Did he fuck his stepmom in a trailer park? Yes. These are all true things. Did he spectacularly self-destruct and then flip into the Christian Piccolini business model, where now he's an ex-hate guy and he's a t-shirt salesman? Yes. However, there was a time I would have rather had Matt Heimbach out speaking on people's behalf than anybody that is in my YouTube comment section. There's not. If I had to pick, okay, we got a crowd out there. We need to get some people. We need to win some hearts and minds. Here's your choice, Mersh. You can choose Matt Heimbach, or you can choose amongst all your YouTube commenters. I would have to vote for Heimbach, because say what you want, but the dude knew how to talk to people. So yeah, that whole thing like really got to me. There's just a bunch of annoying people going like, why didn't you challenge Alex Jonestein about his Jew fucking? I'm like, really? Okay, so basically work hard to get somebody on your show for many, many, many months, and then he comes on the show and just tell him to go fuck himself, basically. Just basically invite somebody into my home, or the digital equivalent of our home, which is our show. Invite somebody into our home, and as soon as I walk in the living room and kick their shoes off, just cut their fucking throat. Is that what you'd like me to do? There's a reason why some people are good at this and some people fucking ain't. So it annoyed me when some of these people were saying that shit. That being said, nobody's going to take today away from us. Nobody. There's nothing that could happen today that will piss me off or put me in a bad mood. I'm so happy about today. This is the thing. Like, this is a guy where 10 years ago, if you asked me, hey Mersh, who would you like to have on your show? 10 years ago, the answer would have been Alex Jones. 5 years ago, the answer would have been Alex Jones. A bunch of years, like, it didn't matter. It would always, the pick would almost always be Alex Jones. So yeah, today was a great day. Very excited. We're talking about going on his show, so that should be a lot of fun too. So,
okay, let's get back to the high IQ election fraud discussion with law professor Rick Hazen
about
Lithwick.
When can you do a recount?
For recounts, what happens is people cast ballots in boxes, and then there's a sign-in sheet as well. And so the numbers on the sign-in sheets have to match the number of ballots in the box, unless there's a reconciled difference, a paper jam, a lost ballot, and they have to be caught on election night. And if they're not caught on election night with an explanation, then those precincts can't be counted. And so I got it took a day or so, but I got they're called reconciliation sheets of 600 plus precincts in Detroit. And I found that more than half of them, the counts were off by 5 or more, which means that they couldn't be subject to recount by Michigan law, which is a pretty strenuous law, but also, you know, given the context of Detroit's problems, doesn't give a lot of faith in the system.
Just to be clear now, we're talking about boxes and checklists and stuff that's left in cars, right? This is how we decide elections in America? Like it's 1804?
So it's not true everywhere. In some places, election administrators do a whole lot with very little in terms of resources, but there are places where there are problems. And there have been great improvements in many states, but what happened in Detroit is evidence that there hasn't been improvement everywhere. And if you have a really close election, where's the attention going to go?
Okay, everyone keeps sending me this article, 5 more ways Joe Biden magically outperformed election norms. And why are they sending me this article on the Federalist? Because it's by the noted election analyst J.B. Shirk. You know J.B. Shirk? He writes for the Federalist. He's on American Thinker. J.B. Shirk, noted election analyst. Okay, let's delve into this. Surely the journalist class should be intrigued by the historic implausibility of Joe Biden's victory, that they are not as curious, to say the least. All right, not exactly a great beginning here. Come on, man, cut out the malarkey. In all the excitement among objective journalists for Joe Biden's declared victory, reporters are missing how extraordinary the Democrats' performance was in the 2020 election. It's not just that the former vice president is on track to become the oldest president in American history. It's what he managed to accomplish at the polls this year. Candidate Joe Biden was so effective at animating voters in 2020. All right. This guy is not a very deep thinker. Why is everyone sending me a link to this shallow article? It has nothing. Joe Biden's votes had nothing to do with how effective he was at animating voters. Joe Biden's votes overwhelmingly came because people hated Donald Trump. Nobody voted for Joe Biden. Nobody was galvanized by Joe Biden except to the degree that he was the alternative to Donald Trump. So this language here, Joe Biden was so effective at animating voters in 2020 that he received a record number of votes, more than 15 million more than Barack Obama received in his re-election of 2012. Not surprising. Number one, many Americans hate Donald Trump. Number two, voting was made much easier in 2020 with mail-in ballots due to COVID-19. Amazingly, he managed to secure a victory while also losing in almost every bellwether county across the country. Okay, given how shallow his thinking is, I am skeptical of that claim. No presidential candidate has been capable of such electoral jiu-jitsu until now. So who is this guy? I've never heard of J.B. Shirk. Why are people so enthused? While Biden underperformed Hillary Clinton's 2016 totals in every urban county in the United States. Is that even true? He outperformed her in the metropolitan areas of Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Is that even true? Even more surprisingly, the former VP put up a record haul of votes despite Democrats' general failures in local House and state legislative seats across the nation. Okay, I have not memorized all facts about the 2020 election. I do know that in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden received fewer votes than Hillary Clinton did. This is clown show. Why are you sending me links to some clown show Federalist? Come on, man. I cut out the malarkey. I mean, this is absurd. Really? All right, Henry Olsen, Washington Post op-ed, talks about voter fraud. If fraud were behind President-elect Joe Biden's win, we'd expect to see significantly higher turnout increases in key states when compared to the nation as a whole. We would expect to see higher turnout increases within those states in Democratic areas more than in Republican areas, since those regions are places where Democrats are more likely to be able to hide any stolen votes. We should expect to see significantly larger shifts in voter margins toward the Democrats from other previous elections as the fraud alters the area's normal voting patterns. None, zip, zero, zilch of these early warning signs of fraud appear in the results. Voter turnout was up significantly almost everywhere compared with 2016. The only places where this is not true are places that hadn't yet counted all their ballots. The huge turnout increases observed in battleground states such as Arizona, Georgia, Florida, and Texas is in part explained by their rapid population growth compared with the rest of the country. Voter enthusiasm rather than fraud is the most obvious explanation for the large increases in votes cast in swing states. The results within swing states do not support allegations of voter fraud. Take Wisconsin. The 2020 map looks almost identical to the 2016 outcome, with Biden flipping only 2 counties that Trump had narrowly carried. Trump's margins in rural and small metro area counties only narrowly changed from 2016. Biden's margins in the state's Democratic strongholds were not unusually high, nor was turnout noticeably higher there than in Trump regions. Trump's vote share increased in Milwaukee, in the city of Milwaukee, right? If there was voter fraud, you wouldn't see that. Turnout in that deep blue county increased by less than 4% compared with a 10% statewide increase. So this Democratic stronghold of Milwaukee, Trump increases his vote and the overall vote goes up much less, a much lower percentage than the state, right? If you think that voter fraud drove the results, you would not see this. Same factors existed in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Biden flipped only 3 Michigan counties. each of which Trump carried by only 3 points or less in 2016. Biden flipped only 2 Pennsylvania counties, both which are known as bellwethers that usually back the winner. So this writer for the Federalist is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Bellwether counties, the Biden flipped, the Biden carried. You're looking for them? 2 in Pennsylvania, Erie, Northampton. And why are you sending me this moronic article in the Federalist by some guy who doesn't know anything? Philadelphia is alleged to be the site of massive voter fraud, right? It reports fewer votes cast in Philadelphia than in 2016. And Joe Biden has a smaller vote lead in Philadelphia than Hillary Clinton received. Okay, if the fix is in, that's incompetence. All 3 states' results indicate what was to blame for Trump's defeat: suburban vote slippage. Trump's suburban margins dropped in deep red non-swing states as well: Louisiana, Kentucky, Missouri. Trump did significantly worse in suburbs in deep blue states such as Oregon and Washington. Trump lost with the suburbs. And you keep sending me this guy for the Federalist who simply doesn't know anything. And the noted J.B. Shirk writes, Biden accomplished all this after receiving a record low share of the primary vote compared to his Republican opponent heading into the general election. Trump didn't have an opponent in the primaries of any significance, so that's not surprising. 80 million votes. Why is that surprising? We've had a massive population increase, and we've made voting easier than ever, and we have half the population that appears to loathe President Trump. Proving how sharp his political instincts are, Biden managed to gather a record number of votes. Has nothing to do with Biden's sharp or dull political instincts. The alternative was Trump. Many people hate Trump, ergo they vote for Biden. Voting is easier than ever, ergo you have increased turnout. So the former VP managed to gather a record number of votes while consistently trailing President Trump in measures of voter enthusiasm. Yeah, people were not voting for Biden, they were voting against Trump. That's how elections often work. Biden was so savvy that he motivated voters unenthusiastic about his campaign to vote for him in record numbers. Yes, that's because the alternative was Donald Trump. People who hated Trump voted for Biden even though they didn't particularly care for Biden. That's the way the real world works. Often your choice is not between great and awful. Often your choice is between bad and worse. There's no enthusiasm for Biden. There was great enthusiasm for defeating Donald Trump. Come on, man. Cut out the malarkey.
Going to go to the place that is the weakest link.
So Precinct 152 is pretty infamous because 52 ballots were discovered in a ballot container, but 307 votes had been logged into a poll book. And at the end of the day, they found out that there was a tub of ballots on.
And Elliot Blatt says, Luke, your objections to this Federalist article are ad hominem based solely on your own incredulity. No, I documented why what he said is just factually incorrect. And I also documented how what he said was logically incorrect. The guy has no expertise, and it's just pure foolishness. Not pure. There's a lot of foolishness. There's so much foolishness. It's so overwhelming at the beginning of the article. I don't understand why anyone would take it seriously. It has nothing to do with whether or not people are enthused for Joe Biden. Reality is people, the American people, had a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So even if you have zero enthusiasm for Joe Biden, if you hate Donald Trump, you're going to vote for Biden. It has nothing to do with how savvy Biden is. Biden is set to become the first president in 60 years to lose the states of Ohio and Florida. Yes, demographics have changed. For Biden to lose these key bellwethers by notable margins and still win the national election is newsworthy. Yes, it is newsworthy. States that used to be bellwethers no longer appear to be bellwethers. Republican, Florida and Ohio are now reliably Republican states for the presidential election. Biden is on his way to winning the White House after having lost almost every historic bellwether county across the country. That's false. That's bogus. I just pointed out 2 key Pennsylvania counties that Biden won. Biden trailed Clinton except in a select few cities. Biden won despite Democrat losses everywhere else. And why is that so shocking? Many people just simply voted for Joe Biden and did not feel informed enough or cared enough to vote for any other political office because Donald Trump energized his opponents as well as his supporters. Biden overcame Trump's commanding primary vote? That's absurd. Trump didn't have any significant primary opponent. Joe Biden achieved the impossible. No, nobody who has any expertise in political science believes that Joe Biden achieved the impossible. And here's his pompous conclusion. It's interesting that many more journalists are pointing that out. They're not pointing it out because it's not true. Guess what happens when 10,000 people who know more than you do, who have more expertise than you, don't point something out? There are 2 choices. One is that you know better than the 10,000. The second option is what you believe is false. That's why nobody else is pointing out your false points. The noted J.B. Shirk, a proud American from Daniel Boone country.
Underneath the tabulators, and that they hadn't been sealed, so they couldn't be counted. I think it speaks to the general sloppiness in Detroit. It wasn't just the 2016 election. The most recent.
Why was the counting stopped? I don't know. I am not an election law expert. I would like to know that. Experts are always wrong when it came to polling. No, they weren't always wrong. They weren't perfect. As my father told me many times when I was growing up, the problem is not that the world does not make sense. The problem is that the world does not make perfect sense. Luke is just being contrarian. Well, I have been fairly consistent in my critiques of bogus Republican claims of voter fraud since I educated myself a little on this topic more than 2 weeks ago. And nothing has happened in the past 2 weeks and a couple of days that in any way undermines my critique. Trump's legal team very much appears to be operating in clown world. Their cases just get thrown out of court. And I don't know any neutral observers who respect their work on this occasion. So here's a rough heuristic that works for me. You hear, say, the Republican point of view, then you hear the Democratic point of view, and you kind of weigh up and try to figure out what makes sense. Generally speaking, if the Democrats have a great point or the Republicans have a great point, you will see moderates from the other side start to shift in a direction towards the side that has the great points. So I read the voter fraud critiques, and then I read the mainstream media debunkings. Nobody is shifting towards massive voter fraud. Like neutral observers, more moderate observers, nobody is being shifted towards the Trump legal team's position. Now, when you have real intellectual change, or when you have a story that comes out and it starts to gain credibility, you start to see people shifting towards accepting this new story. You're not seeing any shift towards people accepting this new story. Now, that may happen this afternoon. There may be a sea change. We may finally get some substantial evidence of voter fraud.
Recent election, 2018, there was another recount involving the city clerk because of misplaced ballots, unsealed ballots, open ballot boxes. And it's a pretty frequent occurrence in Detroit that's really undermined people's feeling of integrity in the process.
The infamous Precinct 152, those ballots that had never been counted, I mean, it led to conspiracy theories. WorldNet Daily had a headline, quote, "Stealing the Vote, Recount uncovers."
And the question in the chat, what do the experts say about stopping counting? I don't know. I would be interested to hear what they say.
Serious fraud in Detroit. Fox News Insider declared, quote, "Oops, Stein's recount turns up more votes than voters in Detroit." And even the Detroit Free Press had an inflammatory headline, quote, "Detroit's election woes, 782 more votes than voters."
Okay, so this is a podcast recorded February 2nd, 2020. Elliot says in the chat, things happen that aren't provable if the evidence is destroyed. No, it's not necessary that they aren't provable because you would have had human agency at work. You would have had people who do things. So to steal an election, right, thousands of people would have to be in on it, and any of those people would face massive incentives to come out and to reveal the steal. So maybe it's difficult, maybe it's challenging, maybe it's hard to establish voter fraud. It's not impossible because there will always be human beings who are carrying it out, and human beings react to incentives. You create sufficient incentives, people will come forward to reveal the fraud.
That's got to undermine people's confidence in the process. Nothing could be less interesting than talking about tubs of uncounted ballots, and yet who the next president is could turn on it.
This is just the section where we just talk about how weird it is that in the 21st century, I can pick up my phone and order exactly the right number of milligrams of rice in my Chinese food. We can do everything perfectly. It's delivered to our door. And yet still we lose boxes of ballots and machines don't work. And
yeah, because, for example, in a country like Australia, it's a federal system, and yet there is national controls over the election process. There's one electoral system for Australia. United States, different counties will have different electoral processes. That's why it's much more chaotic. Also, you have a lot of the parts of the United States that are run by historically incompetent groups.
Hanging chads determine, I mean, there's a way in which so much of what you're calling incompetence is just, we run elections as though it's still rockin' 1840.
Well, so first of all, last night before we recorded this podcast, my Chinese food delivery was wrong twice.
Okay.
First, they brought the wrong food, then they forgot the rice. And it's like, America's democracy is not going to crumble if I didn't get my dinner right. Similarly, people say, well, why don't we just vote with ATM machines? Well, you know, there's $1 billion in fraud every year with ATM machines, and the republic still stands because banks are willing to absorb that as the cost of doing business. If we had that level of error with elections, we'd be in big trouble. I mean, think about it. This is, aside from going to war or maybe the census, holding an election is the most complicated thing we do as a country. And we have this history of decentralized elections. So we don't hold one election on election day. We're actually holding thousands of elections, or even holding over 1,000 elections just in the state of Michigan. And most election officials do a very good job in how they run their elections. But there are these places where there are still problems.
So remind us, Rick, what in the end happens with this recount?
The court stopped the recount. Not only does Michigan have some problems with, how poll workers are administering their elections, they also have some problems with the rules for running recounts. And this recount was stopped. Clinton didn't kick up more of a fuss because she didn't think she could win. You'd think that with these ballots uncounted, Detroit ballots are going to heavily favor Clinton. But they calculated it wasn't enough to make a difference. Maybe they didn't want to shine more of a light on the problems in Detroit, because Detroit, as many American cities are, is a city run by Democrats. The state board of elections did an investigation, and their conclusion is
there was mass incompetence. They found no evidence of any effort to try to stuff ballots. In fact, in Detroit, at the end of the day, I think the difference was about 500 ballots that they couldn't reconcile. And the former state elections director, Chris Thomas, conducted an audit, and they found that it was poor worker training. It was the ballot, the machines themselves were 10 years old. They led to frequent jams. There were ballots misplaced, but that there was no effort to throw the election. This is the result of an old city's aging infrastructure, poorly trained workers who work, one day every 4 years or a couple elections, and just really poor practices rather than fraud.
No malfeasance, but incompetence.
Support for the Gabfest comes from Crooked Media. Love It or Leave It is an insanely funny, wildly popular.
Okay, so some comments in the chat that remember Trump gained with every demographic group except white men. He dropped 5 points in his support from white men, and that's what cost Trump the election. Alex says, did Trump even deserve to win? No one is passionately in love with Biden. Who here thinks Trump deserved a victory? His campaign was offensive to his core constituency, white working class male voters. He rambled about the Platinum Plan, about Biden being racist and tough on crime, that Biden was weak on crime because of riots under Trump's watch. He blathered about black unemployment. No, the white working class is Trump's biggest base. Trump never mentioned white unemployment. Trump failed his base by nakedly pandering to blacks. And the chat says the Platinum Plan was all fake. It was just for optical purposes to get out the black vote. Trump would spend 15 minutes listing unemployment rates, refused to list whites. Biden mentioned whites more than Trump. Both sides don't even acknowledge the white working class. Even talking about whites openly brings charges of Hitler and Nazism.
On the incompetence of election administrators in places that have large minority populations, often run by people of color who are the election administrators. And race just becomes a part of this conversation, often in ways from Trump that seem tinged with racism. Broward County in 2018, it was a very close race for the United States Senate between the incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson and the outgoing governor and Republican candidate Rick Scott. Brenda Snipes was the election administrator in Broward County, and she had a history of problems in how she administered her elections. She wasn't transparent at all. She didn't tell Rick Scott when they were talking to Rick Scott how many ballots were left to count. Trump goes on the attack against Brenda Snipes, an African-American woman. It was one of a number of attacks of African-American women that Trump had announced at the time.
Okay, so if Trump criticizes African-Americans, he's racist. If Trump doesn't criticize African-Americans who deserve criticism, he's racist. He can't win no matter what he does. Is this Professor Rickhausen essentially stating that to criticize black incompetence is to be racist, that to criticize blacks is unacceptable in the United States? Is that really what he wants to argue?
Here's President Trump shouting over the blades of Marine One back in November 2018.
If you look at Broward County, they have had a horrible history. And if you look at the person, in this case a woman, involved, she has had a horrible history. And all of a sudden, they're finding votes out of nowhere. And Rick Scott, who won by, it was close, but he won by a comfortable margin. Every couple of hours, it goes down a little bit. And then you see the people, and they were involved with that fraud of the fake dossier, the phony dossier. And I guess I hear they were somehow involved or work with the GPS fusion people who have committed. I mean, you look at what they've done.
What do you think of that new Fox News slogan, standing up for what's right? I mean, that seems really lame. They're promoting Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham as standing up for what's right.
You look at the dishonesty. Look. There's bad things have gone on in Broward County. Really bad things. She's been to court. She's had a lot of problems. She's lost. I say this. He easily won, but every hour it seems to be going down. I think that people have to look at it very, very cautiously.
Well, that was a pretty bizarre episode of Chopper Talk right there. There was no evidence that Brenda Snipes ever tried to steal an election. There was only evidence of incompetence. Not sure how GPS fusion worked its way in there. It's kind of a web of conspiracy theories lead as far as the Ukraine call and impeachment. But no evidence of rigging the vote, just your good old-fashioned incompetence. But Democrats are in a tough spot in terms of how they respond to such attacks because they don't want to call out their own people for messing things up. Listen to Joel Kurth from Michigan's Bridge Magazine again, and you can hear how that dynamic that we saw in Broward County also play out in Michigan.
Okay, let's get a little bit here from Greg Gutfeld, see what he has to say on the 5.
Now the Israelis and the Saudis are coming together in terms of a deal. I think Iran's never been weaker than they have been in the last 20 years.
You can think that, but it doesn't make
I
it
know.
true. Because you have a private
Ask
intel.
anybody, Jessica.
I'll ask someone on the street after this.
I want to get to
That's
Dagan.
my job.
I want to get to
You ate my time. I'll get you back.
Dagan. Okay, we're just basically going back to the way things were. It's kind of sad. I mean, that's what this is. We're just going. They're actually not even hiding it.
Are we going to cede our power as the world's biggest energy producer? Because that's how you take power away from.
Okay, great. That's what winning looks like. All right, let's get more here. Professor Rickhausen.
Obviously, this is their base. It's largely minority. You don't want to accuse them of being incompetent, and you want to respect their autonomy. It opens the Democrats up to accusations of incompetence that you see of Republicans accusing Democrats of rigging elections when a lot of times these are sort of really simple mistakes, but they can't have good explanations for why they occurred. It wasn't just Detroit. A lot of the heavily urban counties had similar problems as Detroit. There was Genesee County, which is Flint. I believe Saginaw County had similar problems.
There's a very pernicious asymmetry here. When Democrats have problems with incompetence, they're accused of voter fraud. They're accused of stealing the election. And Republicans look the other way when the incompetence is happening in Republican areas.
Okay, let's get a little bit more here from Greg Gutfeld.
Gutfeld with Dagan McDowell, Jessica Tarloff, Jesse Waters, and she captains a gravy boat. Dana Perino, the 5. Hear that gurgling noise like something sucking on a pacifier? That's the media on hearing Joe's cabinet choices.
These are also serious, qualified individuals.
But it is not going to be political?
They are not political. This is about the least flashy team you could possibly get. They are deeply experienced, they are humble, and they are lifelong public servants.
Oh, my God. Yellen, Kerry, Blinken, all baby food for a colicky media. Add Warren and Sanders, and they'd be in a coma. So Trump broke the mold, and Joe's team thinks this is how you piece it all back together, although they have no idea what to fix. Because what they call damage was progress. Prosperity, peace. Yeah, that sucks. First, there's Kerry, what morticians call the discount special. There's a deadly terror attack in Paris. He sends James Taylor.
Just close your eyes and think of me. Yes, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night.
Yeah, they wanted that. He also said there'd be riots if the U.S. Embassy moved to Jerusalem. He was wrong. He said there'd be no peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process. Wrong again. Jared Kushner, a mere novice, ran circles around Lurch. Biden made him climate czar because he mistook him for a tree. Then there's Blinken, my favorite reindeer. Like Kerry, he whiffed on Middle East peace, but add Syria, ISIS, Iran, and Libya. The guy's been wrong on so many things, it's better just to list what he's right on. But these aren't gifts for you, but presents to the media. An elite staff means elite access so the press can once again feel superior over you. And they're also boring, which the press mistakes as competent. The worst part about war is that it's boringly efficient in filling up body bags, something Trump avoided, but that won't happen again. But many things won't happen again because they came from an outsider. Think about it, because the media won't. It's not their strong suit. 4,000 black men freed from prison. That's faster than Harris could arrest them. Removing the North Korea threat, then stacking up Middle East peace deals, boosting the lowest earners' pay and household income. Don't even start yelling for that. Ushering in vaccines faster than thought possible. Orange Godzilla did all this while undermined and hated by the establishment. No wonder they now seek refuge in the warm swamp of Joe's mediocrity. They're wimps. All right, Jesse, why does the media prefer this mob?
Well, ideologically they do, but it's not going to get clicks. It's not going to get book deals. It's not going to get them on television. It's going to be boring because they're not going to be able to report on personality. They're going to have to.
Okay, let's get back to the crowd pleaser. Rickhausen, election
areas. And so I think, the double standard gets applied once again.
I think it's a real balancing act. I think in urban areas, obviously, they're dealing with many problems and decades of disinvestment that lead to some voting irregularities on wider scales. I will say, though, too, that it's not.
It's just it's a matter of disinvestment. That's why certain groups, certain parts of the country are less competent. It's that damn disinvestment.
Any different than what's happening on smaller scales in rural places. It's just a matter of volume.
But let's be clear, and this goes back to the fundamental point of your book, that whether we're talking about incompetence in election administration in Democratic areas, in Republican-controlled areas, and to be sure, Georgia has had some very serious problems, which we'll talk about in a later show in this series. But the effect overwhelmingly is the same, which is it undermines confidence in the electoral process, and it's easier to believe a conspiracy theory than to believe that incompetence is the sole cause.
The fact of the matter is that when elections are administered badly, when there are problems, it can have a profound effect on people's trust.
The Green Party is convinced that elections are stolen systematically in Detroit. And I think on the other side, the conservatives do as well. And I think that the vast middle, the 85% in the middle, have a sort of a shoulder shrug of that's just how things happen sometimes in Detroit. It's not a great way to run a democracy. I mean, you want ultimate, like, utmost faith that your vote's going to count. And unfortunately, especially in Detroit and sometimes in Michigan, that's just, you can't always be sure that's the case.
So here's the problem. When things go wrong in places like Broward County, Detroit, and Georgia, the news media and interested parties rarely differentiate between incompetence and deliberate abuse. Or that differentiation comes later on down the line when the damage is already done. It took months for Michigan election officials to investigate. In the meantime, what did people who watch Fox News learn? That there were more votes than voters in the city of Detroit.
I don't think that there's been any evidence of trying to throw elections that have been, that are credible. But I think that it's hard not to let your imagination wander if you're frequently having power outages in precincts during elections and you're losing ballots. Why wouldn't you have a conspiracy theory?
Maybe this is a good corollary to your initial point, which is we only think about broken election systems in the week before elections. We only think about them again in the week after. And so if 6 months later a finding comes out, no harm, no foul, or no foul but harm, it's too late for anybody to care. And conspiracy theories not only get fixed in our imagination, but they have a pretty big megaphone in this current White House. The way in which election returns come in from urban areas absolutely amplifies some of the worst conspiracy mongering, right?
Sure. So the larger the jurisdiction, the longer it takes to count the votes. The more people there that are voting with provisional ballots or, maybe they're new voters, the longer it takes to count the votes. These tend to be in urban areas. These tend to be in areas that have more Democratic voters. And that's why we see what Professor Ned Foley has called the big blue shift, where votes start out being more Republican. And as more votes are counted, you end up with a Democratic surge. We saw this, you may remember, in the 2018 election. As California was counting millions of absentee ballots, we saw election after election in Orange County, California, swing from Republicans in the lead to Democrats. That wasn't because there was any conspiracy. That's just because that's how election administration goes. And Trump was saying, let's just take the results as they are on election day. He wants to freeze it in time when he's in the lead. But in fact, we do see this shift, and there's not a nefarious reason for it. But if you're inclined to believe those conspiracy theories, you may indeed find that there's something problematic about it.
Okay, so Rick, having focused, laser focused on Michigan's problems and specifically maybe Detroit's problems, is there some glimmer of hope here to be gleaned?
Well, you're not going to find it from me, but you might find it from Jocelyn Benson, a former election law professor and law school dean. Now she's the Secretary of State of Michigan, and I should pause for a second and say we've been talking about Secretaries of State.
Okay, we've got alt-right
what are
talk,
they?
man.
They're the chief election
What's
officer.
going on, bro?
Not much. How you doing? How's the show going?
Pretty good, man.
Yeah, it's a good show. You just got to get some more guests in here. You know what I mean? Don't tell me Kyle's doing something more important than showing up here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe he is. Hopefully he is. But yeah, I don't know. I think your coverage is good. I'm pretty disappointed in the competence or lack thereof that the Republicans are showing, the Kraken and all this. But I don't know. It's interesting. I wanted to see that documentary, the JFK one that you have been previewing. That looks actually pretty good. I think it's pretty new.
Yeah, it's good. It just came out a few days ago, and it's available. It's available for sale on YouTube. So I bought it for $10, but you can rent it for like $3.
Yeah, I think I might try to do that. There's a lot of good documentaries that I've been watching lately. Some about Trump and the craziness around Trump. But I don't know. At this point, maybe a minority opinion, but I feel like a never Trumper. I just want him to go away.
Yeah.
I don't think his legacy isn't all bad. I mean, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, even if you like certain presidents, maybe like Nixon or George W. Bush, I think by the end of their presidency, a lot of people were like, okay, they just need to go away. And his legacy is complex. I still haven't quite figured it out myself.
Yeah,
you feel similar?
Well, no, I'm not as negative about Trump. To me, he's still. I can't think of anyone who's better among Republican politicians. But I mean, if Ted Cruz were in office, I would believe he'd be more competent. I'd expect that, say, Tom Cotton or even Josh Hawley might well be more competent. And Tucker Carlson, who knows, maybe he would be more competent. I think overall, Trump did more good things in his one term than Reagan and George W. Bush did in their 2 terms. So Trump put a substantial crimp in immigration. He slashed refugee intake. He prohibited that anti-white racial bias malarkey. He got 3 conservative Supreme Court justices through and nominated onto the court. So he got rid of those standards that made men highly vulnerable to being kicked out of universities without proper evidence for sexual misconduct. So I think he did a lot of good things. And while Reagan, for example, he signed an immigration amnesty bill. And George W. Bush was also a squish on immigration. So I think overall, Donald Trump did a lot of good things. His personality, I did not like Trump prior to 2015. And I don't think I like his personality even now. But I do like many of the things that he got accomplished.
Yeah, I think I would largely agree with that. But I just feel like he's crossed the line. After I voted for him, I was like, oh man, he's just crossed the line in a really crazy way. You know what I mean? I meant to apologize. Last time I was on, it's not a glitch, but in my girlfriend's car, it's on the Bluetooth. So every time she comes within range, she steals whatever phone call I had. So I had this long, elegant goodbye, and then it switched to her.
Yeah.
And it freaks her out. I'll be talking to somebody or listening to music, and it'll go into her car. So it's like, man, you can't have any secrets these days with all this tech stuff. She's got the ring on the door, so I can't even lie. I can't lie and say, oh, I got up at 6 o'clock and I had a really productive day. It's nope, she would see on the ring when I leave. It's ridiculous.
It's kind of a good thing. How long have you guys been together?
About 2 years now.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, in the age of smartphones, it's in some ways it's much more difficult to lie and deceive your partner because all they need to do is look at your phone.
Yeah, all the electronics. Yeah, it's hard enough to deceive your girlfriend, let alone any crime. You see these crimes that the criminals might get away with it, and nope, the cops just subpoena your cell phone records, and it's like, oh, you were right here at this time. You're caught. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's why crime rates should be dropping, and that we've had this dramatic escalation both in the late Obama era collapse and then in 2020 just shows how discordant it is, because given technological and medical breakthroughs, we should have fewer people by 2-3% each year getting murdered.
Right. Well, I don't know about the clearance rates, how they solve it. But it used to be even as recently as the 80s, if there was a murder and there wasn't a witness, they weren't going to solve that crime. And in the hood, it's really hard to get people to snitch. But now they'll get somebody on camera. They have all these electronic witnesses, so to speak, cameras, cell phone records, other forensics. So hopefully the clearance rate is better. I don't know if it is. I would imagine it is.
Yeah, I definitely expect it. And also because of technology, they can deploy their resources much more effectively.
Yeah, definitely. But I've said this before, coming into your show, your sphere or whatever, it's been really enlightening, just kind of the ugly side of the right, I would say, and you can see it on full display now. It's just, with this election stuff, you can see how people make up conspiracies like in real time based on whatever information is out there. It's pretty crazy. I don't know. It's kind of, I always listen to Rush, and he would, one things he would harp on is how he hated moderates because they don't really take a stand. But I don't know. They seem more normal to me than kind of the extremists on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, because people are extreme. They're much more inclined to deny the evidence because they want to live in their fantasy world.
Yeah, so it's got to be a hard job at YouTube or Twitter trying to enforce whatever disinformation because it's all over the place. It's on both sides. It's like an impossible task.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely impossible. And it's also a challenge for pundits when their audience all want them to tell them one thing and intellectually that it is false. Go ahead.
But maybe people will learn how to deal with the disinformation since it's everywhere, They'll sort of develop an immunity.
Yeah, they have. I mean, people don't make stupid, reckless decisions based on disinformation. Disinformation is really a fancy name for people want certain, say, election outcomes, and then they go hunting, looking for evidence. So, for example, people who support Donald Trump, they're not going to find any support for that in the mainstream media, so they have to go to alternative sources. Now, it wasn't that these alternative sources changed many people's minds. It's just that they wanted to vote for Trump, and they were just looking for reasons to be able to share with people.
Right. I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like our politicians were more competent, so to say, in as recently as the 80s or 90s? Because when I see this, what is it, Kelly Loeffler, who's running for Senate, and she's insulting Ilhan Omar. I mean, I really hate Ilhan Omar, but it's like, I don't know. It turns me off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did think that they were more competent in the 1980s. I mean, personal insults have always been a staple of politics.
I guess it kind of is what it is. I just got to grow a thicker skin about it.
Hey, you did a video about victim posturing by Otto Pohl. What are you talking about?
Oh, I'm trying to, I used to go on Otto Pohl's show. He was always 100% nice to me. But it's like, how to describe his, I guess like anything related. I'm trying to think what his post was about. Oh, it was about that kind of cringy leftist who posted about we need to, I'm trying to remember the words he used.
Re-educate people. We need truth and reconciliation.
Re-educate, or maybe it was deprogram people.
Yeah.
And actually, like, I have a feeling I wouldn't like this guy because he's like a cringy leftist Democrat. But it's like there are some crazy fucking stop the steal people that are, and it's like, yeah, these people are pretty ridiculous. So I didn't 100% disagree with the guy. But it's basically taking a statement like that and saying, oh, this guy wants to throw people in camps and re-educate them. And he was saying, oh, it's just like bending over backwards to try to make it seem like we're going to be thrown in camps. And he was comparing it to the rape of 2 million German women. And I was like, come on, this is fucking ridiculous. It's like, clearly the guy meant like we need to educate people that, they didn't bring in, there's not a conspiracy, this isn't a conspiracy where they brought in like 500,000 votes for Biden in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? It's just, he's talking about people that invent conspiracies, and this is kind of dangerous and concerning, Like I even say, and this might actually be true, obviously our politicians are concerned about COVID. So people say, the big government is cracking down on our freedoms, and they might have a point in what they're saying. They're forcing us to wear masks, and they're cracking down on our freedom. But I could picture it being the opposite. If politicians were like, "Hey, COVID's not a big deal. Go shop, do what you want," the same people would be saying, "Well, they're trying to kill us. Like, people are dying, and they're not doing anything." It's like people are just looking for something to complain, and in a way they're being oppressed. It's just pretty dangerous, ridiculous thinking. Potentially dangerous. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think also that much of the punditry on YouTube and elsewhere is crowdfunded. So people face also financial incentives to tell people what they want to hear.
Right. So it's like people have these hair trigger responses that go along with the Holocaust. It's like, oh, they're trying to limit immigration, which is what they did during the Holocaust. And that's like the flip side. But then Otto has like this, I don't know, it's the flip side of that, where everything is the Germans were put upon. And I don't know, it just goes into a ridiculous territory. Like maybe some of the stuff that he says actually is a good point, but he just takes it to the point of ridiculousness. But a lot of people do that on Twitter. I was just observing that one because a lot of people were saying the same thing on right-wing Twitter. He just had maybe like one of the most interesting posts. That's why I talked about it.
Yeah, and also people like Otto, I would assume, are much more isolated. So he's normally teaching at a university, and he doesn't have that right now. And so I think during this COVID-19 induced lockdowns, a lot of people have gotten more isolated. And so a sense of proportion, moderation, and ability to talk to people who are different from you, probably essentially emotional intelligence, is probably diminished as people have become increasingly isolated.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just tired of this, like, fighting with everybody, arguing with other people. I'd rather, I'm on a group chat with a bunch of friends, and I think they're all Democrats. But I find it more productive to have conversations on what we agree than like our fight with the enemy on Twitter or something like this. I just wish there was more of that going on.
Yeah, I find it useful in those circumstances to ask people, why do you believe X, Y, Z? Instead of like arguing with people, I just go, why do you believe that? And then I don't rebut, I don't give a rejoinder. I just like to hear people explain why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, definitely. But again, it's Twitter. It's not reality. It's the online interface. It's a little bit different. And people getting along doesn't get the press and attention that the conflict does. You know what I mean? So I think we're to blame, as in the
human
public
nature.
or voters or whatever.
Right. I mean, conflict will make for a much more compelling show. Like if you and I were disagreeing, it would produce much more compelling content. And that's what compels attention. Like if you walk down the street and you see two people fighting, you're going to pay a lot more attention to that than if you walk down the street and you see two people embracing.
Right, exactly. Well, we always had that kind of like good-natured argument about dangerous ideas online and how they affect people. It was like that kind of whole Paul talk.
Mm-hmm.
You guys got into it, and I was sort of like in the middle, but I don't know. I guess everything is online now. So if you want to find whatever online, you can find it if you're just curious and Googling. So people have to be able to handle it themselves. You know what I mean? And
I presume that you've lost interest in Paul talk, right? You realize that you're dealing with someone who's just incredibly dishonest.
No, I don't really have anything against him. I think he makes some interesting videos and he has his own takes on stuff. He does some deep dives into some of the philosophers, Jordan Peterson. I think he makes some good videos. It's just,
but once you get into conflict, you started having a conflict with him, and then you discovered more about him, and that's the last time you mentioned him. You grew disgusted. I listened to your various streams, and you're saying now how much you like and respect some of his work, but when you were going back and forth with him, you completely gave up on him, like two months ago, whenever you're having a disagreement, because you couldn't have a civil disagreement with Poor Talk. He was completely distorting things that you were saying, and you gave up. You haven't made another video about him in several months.
Yeah, I was just over like some of his argumentation.
Yeah,
but
it's
it was
incredibly
fun. I mean, I enjoyed
dishonest and dirty.
Yeah, I mean, I like fighting with people. You know, I don't really have anything to fight with you about. You know what I mean? But I like fighting with people and arguing, and it's fun, and that's what people do online. So, but he has some good videos, and he can sum up. Can't remember. There's one philosopher that he's really big on. But anyway, instead of going online and reading about it, he sums things up pretty well. So I think he makes some interesting videos. I still listen to his videos. It's just I don't really get how he's arrived at some of his conclusions, but I don't know. It was fine. It was interesting. I don't take anything personally.
Yeah, or at least not 3 months later. Like at the time,
yeah, I mean,
you were pretty frustrated.
I wouldn't even say I was frustrated. I was just like, you know, in the moment arguing, but it was fine. Look, it's hard to argue with him because he can clip anything and then portray it as anything,
exactly.
Which is kind of funny. I mean, it's kind of funny when you make a video and then this guy clips it and basically makes memes out of it and makes fun of you. I mean, it was fun. I enjoyed it. So I wasn't frustrated. I was, you know, partaking in the argumentation. It was fun. But anyway, I think I'm gonna get going. But
okay, man.
Good job on the show. Hopefully you get some more people coming back here, like Kyle, whatever, all your old guests.
Okay, bro. Good to catch up with you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Take care, man. Okay, here's alt-right talk here. Poor Talk's deceitful editing.
So let's talk about selective editing when you're quoting somebody. There's been a few times when Paul Talk I think he might actually misunderstand what I'm actually saying. He did that when I was talking about the Dylan Roof shooting. He thought I was actually talking about police brutality. I don't know how you get that shit confused, but so I don't know whether to say he's being honest or he's being dishonest or he actually is just lost about what I'm saying. But let's look at this clip of his, this part of his clip.
You can't get more evil than the ultimate evil. What is that? Some political theory that you think is the ultimate thing? You can't get more evil than...
Oh, looks like I'm talking about the evil Nazis. I'm all paranoid. You can't get more evil than that? All right, now let's look at the actual clip.
And he created a lot of enemies, opponents.
Talking about Melky here.
Or whatever, so I don't find it that surprising that he doesn't feel very comfortable talking about whatever it is on YouTube. You know, like comparing Jews to termites that you have to spray for, saying that people should wear stars, Jews should wear stars, communists should wear stars. No, he said Jews and atheists should wear stars. So I would have to wear 2 stars because I'm agnostic, basically. I'd have to wear 2 stars, or maybe just the Jewish star would be enough because, you know, you can't get more evil than the ultimate evil. But
oh, there it is. Okay, so what was I talking about here? I was facetiously talking about Jews here. Maybe you just have to wear 1 star because you can't get more evil than the ultimate evil. But of course, Paul Talk in his paranoia of how obsessed I am with the Nazis presents it like I'm saying I'm talking about the Nazis. You can't get more evil than them. So that's just par for the course with him. But I take it as a compliment, you know, that he has to spin my words and lie about them and misrepresent what they are. You know, it's a compliment, really. I'm just gonna play it again.
You can't get more evil than the ultimate agnostic, basically. I wear 2 stars because I'm agnostic, basically. I'd have to wear 2 stars, or maybe just the Jewish star would be enough because, you know, you can't get more evil than the ultimate evil. But
it's just like an ironic throwaway comment. Not even talking about the Nazis, facetiously talking about Jews, and he takes it and runs like I'm obsessed with the Nazis. It's just funny, you know. This guy Paul, he's smart. He has some interesting ideas, but it's like you agree with me and you acknowledge my points and that you're wrong, or I call you out as an idiot. You know, if your ideas are that strong and are really worth taking seriously, they can be questioned, they can be analyzed. You can say, well, okay, but I don't understand this part. And you wouldn't have to go rants on like Mike is an idiot. Why? Because I don't accept, or I'm at least questioning your worldview. Again, we talked about how horrible Luke Ford is. You can go in his show and question his beliefs, and he'll reply. He won't bitch you out. If you challenge him a lot, he might get upset a little bit, but this is not the way to do it. I don't know. Let's see what else we can see in this video. And then
all of my time talking to Mike.
Yeah, I wasted his time because I disagreed. And
maybe some other people who listen to it.
Ask questions.
Say Hitler is right and this type of thing. Discernment, huh? Yeah, discernment is a good thing, and more of it is always good.
I challenged his discernment.
But
which is a no-no.
singing the praises of people who
accept his criticism.
Say Hitler is right and this type of thing.
Bitch you out.
Is that discernment? That doesn't strike me as discernment.
Strikes me that you didn't understand a damn thing I said.
Then when you have him on your channel, and
just a summary. It shows how he misquotes you.
Okay, let's move on. There's a funny op-ed in the Chicago Tribune. Trump lost. His lawsuits are garbage, but please keep donating. The grift must go on. Soon to be. Not President Donald Trump lost the election. He's losing every court case he and his elite strike farce of buffoon American lawyers present. His claims of massive voter fraud, there wasn't any, and a grand conspiracy, there isn't one, only slightly less ridiculous than his expressed belief that he won in a landslide. He didn't. Actual landslides should sue him for damaging their brand. This remarkable streak of failure might leave some asking, when does all this become just a bit too embarrassing, even for Trump? The answer is simple, never. Trump isn't capable of feeling embarrassed. In his mind, he has never done anything to merit such an emotion. He has never lost at anything. He has never failed. For Trump and his children and the many who sold their souls for a spot in Trump's polluted orbit, the grift must go on. Admitting failure, while crucial for democracy in this instance, would be unacceptably bad for grifting. This crowd of faux patriots will gladly run roughshod over the country if there's money to be had. Need proof? Immediately after the November 3rd election, people on Trump mailing lists began getting emails pleading for donations to fund recounts or to help with something called Official Election Defense Fund. That fund's website shouts, the Democrats want to steal this election and we can't allow the left-wing mob to undermine our election. Of course, the website's fine print shows just how swiftly Trumpian grifters part fools from their money. 75% of each donation up to $5,000 goes first to a Trump political action committee called Save America. Only after meeting that $5,000 threshold does a dime from the 75% cut make it to the so-called recount committee. The remaining 25% of each donation goes to the Republican National Committee. Put more simply, if you donate $100, no money goes to the election fund, while $75 goes to Trump's political action committee and $25 goes to the Republican National Committee. You'd have to donate about $6,667 before any money would go to the election account, and even then it'd be only 25 cents. Trump can use his PAC to pay for travel, for polling, for his own post-presidency political team. We would not want Donald Jr., Eric, or Ivanka to go hungry, would we? All right, let's get back to Professor Richard Hazen here on
officers of the
fraud.
state. But they don't actually get to run the elections in each state because those elections are run on a county or even sub-county level. But they do have some control over how elections are run. So Benson literally wrote the book on secretaries of state and called Secretaries of State guardians of the democratic process, which I think is more aspirational than descriptive. But she's now in charge, and I asked her about some of the concerns raised by Joel Kurth, and here's what she had to say.
In 2016, the heart of the errors were poll worker based, human error, poll workers making errors in the way they left records of ballots after they were cast. And the human errors were identified in the recount process. The integrity of the election itself was not in question. In fact, it just underscored again, in my view, the examples, the types of examples of mistakes that human beings can make when they're running the election process. So they're useful points of reference for us also as we train our election
Candace
workers
Owens?
for future elections. And part of the reason, frankly, why I've made recruiting and training poll workers across the state one of my priorities for preparing for 2020. And across the country, particularly in urban areas, we need to do more to recruit and train.
Candace Owen has filed. It effectively looks like a defamation lawsuit because of fact-checking that Facebook had through its third-party affiliate or whatever, its third-party partner fact-checker, and fact-check something that Candace Owen says, which she's now saying by virtue of that it's defamatory and causing prejudice and all this stuff. I didn't read it in any detail enough to give any more of a synopsis than that, but that Rittenhouse and then that's it. But yeah, what do you think of Candace Owens' lawsuit and her chances of success?
So I think parts of it she filed in state court in Delaware because her company is based there. I guess she lives there. I didn't realize that. She sued the USA Today and another group that was the lead fact-checking groups for Facebook. And the question really will come down to, and she sued under a variety of tort theories, under which the underlying tort is defamation, but she's suing for tortious interference with prospective economic relationships, so on and so forth, tortious interference with an existing contract, and the rest. But she would need to win on defamation, and First Amendment law applies to all of it. The key is they labeled her false. And the question is that a factual statement or a protected opinion? And that will be where it hinges. Her lawyers include Todd McMurdy from Kentucky, who ran against Thomas Massey and who I've had some dealings with and not a fan of. So I think she could have picked better counsel, I'll put it that way. The other counsel is Greta Van Sustren's husband, who is a longtime Democrat, as far as I knew, but he's also a Scientologist. That's, you do that what you want. I would have picked some different counsel. That's all I'll say on that side. But the suit itself appears to be pretty well drafted. It just doesn't do a full enough job of explaining why this is a factual claim. It has some conclusory allegations that could have been fleshed out some more. But it's big. Now she's suing him for $50 million. But it's a little bit different in her case. Apparently, they demonetized her Facebook page. So it might be something to pay attention to because of YouTube's role. Apparently, her Facebook page was bringing in $1 million a month.
Shut up.
Yeah. So there's real financial, that she has real economic damages if she's able to get past a motion to dismiss.
And bear in mind, she has a team and she has an infrastructure and it's a full business and it's not like, it's not like she's alone and talking to them. That's crazy. I mean, that's amazing. Good for her. And people call it grifting. Other people are going to call it hustling. And it's a similar thing because, I made the joke a while back on my channel when, I won't even say the name, when my analysis of a certain deposition in the context of a defamation lawsuit was removed for violating the terms of service for hate speech. And I said, guys, that's a stain on me. Like, that's a stain as if to suggest it was an analysis of a deposition. Even the portions of the deposition that I showed, there was no hate speech. There was nothing along those lines. But just to have that where someone goes to see the link, it's a dead link, and they just see removed because it violates terms of service for hate speech, that's defamatory. I consider that implicitly defamatory. I don't know, a fact check being told that you're wrong, I consider that maybe to be more argumentative and not necessarily as much of a stain, but I can see how it can be a stain, certainly if it results in removal and demonetization on a platform where she's making money.
So she didn't sue Facebook. She just sued the fact checkers themselves, which was USA Today and this other organization. I think to avoid Section 230 exposure.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm going to do a more thorough review of it. It was a long judgment, and you sent it to me today. And it's interesting. It was interesting also just because it rang a little close to home that they don't appreciate when you remove a video and you flag it, you tarnish the brand. And I think Facebook needs to be sensitized to it, but they will not be. So it's interesting. To be continued. We're going to follow that. There was another lawsuit.
Okay, Candace Owens making $1 million a month. Wow.
Talented workforce of election workers on election day to ensure they are prepared to follow the law and and protect the process of the vote.
Are places like Michigan and Florida and Georgia, have they learned what they need to know, and are they geared up and ready to do November 2020 right?
Well, I have more hope than I do optimism. If you asked election administrators in 2012 what the biggest problem they might face in 2016 would be, they might not have said Russian operatives trying to hack into our voter registration databases, which is something that we know happened. Sometimes you're fighting the last war, so now there's a lot of concern about cybersecurity. But we've got a lot of places that are rolling out brand new voting machines being used for the first time. It's like premiering your new play straight to Broadway, high risk there. And so I'm not sure what the future is going to hold. I know that there are a lot of good people with good intentions who are trying to make elections better, but not everyone. And some people are trying to make things worse. So in the book Election Meltdown, I conjured up a kind of worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is rather than those isolated power outages that Joel Kurth talked about in Detroit, how about if there's a cyber attack from a foreign entity that brings down the power grid in the city of Detroit on election day, and the potential for us not being able to run the election over, right? We only have one election day for president. What happens then? I raised the scenario with both Joel Kurth and Jocelyn Benson, asked them what they thought would happen if there were such an attack.
It would be absolutely chaos, and I think it would hurt the people would not want to vote anymore.
On that specific example, in terms of a power outage on election day, we have generators in place and backup plans and, of course, paper ballots to enable us to actually keep proceeding if we are all in close communication.
Okay, there's a new documentary out about the late Dr. John Sarno, who specialized in healing back pain.
When the pressures that I put myself under caught up with me, I got slammed to my office floor in incredible pain, and I couldn't move for weeks. I had a lot of time to think.
Really tangled. Woo.
I thought about how the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves shape our sense of who we are. The writer Thomas Wolfe famously wrote, "You can't go home again." But a couple of years ago, when my mom moved out of the house that I grew up in, my partner Suki and I did just that. We moved with our kids back into my childhood home. We had a number of reasons for moving, but one of the main ones was that we were working on a film about Dr. Sarno, and we needed the time and the space to finish it. In the early 80s, Dr. Sarno predicted that there was going to be an epidemic of chronic pain, but his colleagues ignored him. Unfortunately, he was right.
All right.
Okay, so I have a lob over your microphone.
Sure.
May I?
What am I doing? What have I agreed to do here?
We're making a movie about Dr. Sarno.
How come?
Because, of course, I have a long history of Sarno.
So he cured you?
He helped me.
He helped you.
Well, how's your sound? So this is a long quest film. What happened was I had back problems. And when I was
upper or lower?
Lower back and upper back, all over the back.
Okay.
All over the body.
Oh, you had it all over.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, 2 or 3 times a year, my back would go out for a couple of days. So I read the book at that point. Then my brother gave me his car. They said you had to have bone carved away from his collarbone.
Oh my God.
And he was about to get the surgery, and my dad was like, "Go see Dr. Sarno." So he did, and 3 weeks later, he took his car back. So I went to see him, and I said, "Let's make a movie." And he said, "Okay." You know, it has to be.
Howard Stern went to him too. Isn't that so?
Yeah.
Are we on now? Is the interview starting?
There's no such thing as an interview.
I feel like it's a very unprofessional operation.
Well, yeah, we're on, but that's the point. That actually, the fact that it is semi-unprofessional is kind of the point.
Yeah.
Because if you do it the right way, it's kind of boring, right?
I like the cut of your jib.
So I guess the real question is, do you want to tell me your story of Dr. Sarno?
Yes, I'll tell you the story.
Traditional doctors told me, you need surgery. They told me that only 10% of the country is born with what I have in my shoulder, that it's essentially a birth defect, and blah, 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 blah.
I had been having terrible pain in my arm. And I went to doctors and this and that, and they told me it was, they gave me many different itises, tendinitis, bursitis, all the itis family.
I was so bad personally. During a radio show, I had to lay down on the floor when we were playing commercials. I was in such dire straits and pain.
Because the problem was I thought that I had some, the doctors told me a disc, herniated disc in my neck and all that. And I was just like nervous about this herniated disc the whole time. When I went to see him and I brought the film and everything, he said, no herniated disc, there's nothing wrong with you. What do you mean there's nothing wrong? He says, there's nothing wrong with you. You have tension in your muscles, And I thought that made a lot of sense because I was a stand-up comedian and, there was tremendous tension every night before I would go on.
What Dr. Sarno teaches takes time. It's a lot less time to cut into somebody and cut out a piece of their spine than to say, you don't need to do any of that.
And that's it. Bye-bye.